London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee. Can I ask everyone to please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any further interruptions? And can I now ask our clerk, Hannah Barlow, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies received from the Assembly Member Clark and Assembly Member Polanski, and Assembly Member Ahmad and Assembly Member Russell are here as substitutes.
Okay, before we get to our main item, we have a couple of quick bits of housekeeping. So can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Noted, good. List of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the actions arising from its previous meetings? Noted. Good, well noted. And so that now brings us to item 4, which is our main item for this morning's meeting, which is the 2025-26 GLA Group Budget TFL, which is the catchy name we give to the TFL bit of the GLA Group budget. So I would like to welcome our 4 guests this morning. We have Andy Lord, who's the TFL Commissioner. Good morning, Andy. We have Seb Dance, who's the Deputy Mayor for Transport. Morning, Seb. We have Rachel McLean, who's Chief Finance Officer for TFL. Sorry, I should ask, is it McLean or McLean? I should have asked.
Thank you for asking. It is McLean. McLean.
And Patrick Doig, who is Group Finance Director of TFL. Good morning, Patrick. So if I kick off with the first question to you, Rachel, to what extent does the 25-26 TFL budget include the Mayor's 2024 manifesto commitments?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to invite the Commissioner to speak initially to that point.
OK, that's absolutely fine.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Assembly members. Thank you for the opportunity to join you this today. I'd just like to start, if I may, by reflecting on the remarkable turnaround in TFL's finances. Last year, we delivered the first operating surplus in TFL's history, which is being used to fund essential investment. In fact, the first and only significant public transport authority to do so. I'm proud of what we've achieved for Londoners, working hard to make improvements to our city's transport network against the backdrop of constrained finances. Some recent highlights that have included the first new Piccadilly line train arriving in London in October to start testing. More than 80% of these trains are being manufactured at Siemens' new facility in Goole in Yorkshire, and this marks an exciting step forward in delivery of the Piccadilly line upgrade. We've continued to improve the accessibility of our network, and we announced the next group of tube stations to be prioritised for step-free access works. And we've opened a new ticket hall, which is fully accessible at Paddington to the Bakerloo line platforms. I'm also extremely pleased that TfL secured £485 million in vital government capital funding for next financial year, almost twice the level received for the current year. We're now able to continue to progress plans for replacing rolling stock on the Bakerloo line and the 20-year-old tram fleet in South London, as well as continuing work on the proposed DLR extension to Thamesmead. However, we'll only be able to move these projects into delivery and enter into contracts with the UK-wide supply chain if there is the certainty of a long-term capital funding settlement. This is why I'm pleased that the government provided a commitment to longer-term financial certainty in the budget, and we are working with the Mayor and the government on the submission to the Comprehensive Spending Review. A long-term funding settlement for TfL is absolutely vital for the future of London's public transport. With this, we would be able to deliver a programme of sustainable investment, as well as properly maintain and renew London's transport assets, enabling us to keep our great city moving. We could align our national supply chains around long-term programmes to offer better outcomes for a lower cost. This would support jobs and growth outside of London, as well as within London, protecting London's position as a leading global city and economic powerhouse and supporting a nationwide industrial strategy. Looking to the year ahead, our goal is to maintain and grow TfL's operating surplus over time, securing a financial sustainable future for TfL and ensuring we can fund increased levels of investment to continue to improve London's public transport network. Our budget submission to the GLA sets out how, with this funding and the business rates retention provided by the Mayor, we can continue to deliver for London and for our country. Our plan will support new jobs, homes and economic growth, and will deliver new trains on the Piccadilly line and Elizabeth line, both of which will provide additional capacity, improve reliability and secure skilled jobs in Derby and Goole in East Yorkshire where they are being manufactured, as well as new trains on the DLR. Investment in London's transport network boosts jobs, growth and opportunities across the country. To continue to drive passenger growth, we are focusing on investing in our assets to enable safe and reliable journeys. We are investing in delivering vital safety improvements, such as safety upgrades at bus stations and tackling violence against women and girls. Reflecting on the risks that we face, our budget submission reflects the fact that we are anticipating lower demand growth and higher cost inflation. These are pressures which we will need to manage. However, I'm focused on continuing to grow TfL's operating surplus while increasing investment in renewing our critical assets, which is so vital after a decade of underinvestment in assets due to the uncertain and insufficient government funding since 2015. I'm extremely proud of everything TfL has delivered for Londoners this year, and looking to the next year, we'll continue working with the government, the Mayor and London's boroughs in order to create healthy, connected communities and ensure those living in, working in and visiting London can move around the city safely, inclusively and sustainably. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. A whole load of issues there, which I'm certain that we will be returning to with some more questions later on. In terms of the Mayor's, obviously this is the first budget that you're producing subsequent to the election that we've just had, so presumably you've been integrating the Mayor's 2024 manifesto into your own plans. So to what extent does this proposed budget that we have before us include the Mayor's 2024 manifesto commitments?
So, thank you, Chair. If I may add to the Commissioner's remarks. The budget we are proposing here in its draft submission comes at a time where we have secured just a single year of capital funding. As the Commissioner mentioned, that is very welcome. 485 million inclusive of a component for the Elizabeth Line additional trains. But it is for a single year, and we are now in the early stages of submitting our proposals into the multi-year CSR, which is being run by central government and which we expect to conclude in spring, possibly May of 2025. So to come to your question, our approach for this budget has been to enable progress to be made on all priorities, including the important priorities included in the Mayor's manifesto. So to sort of bring that to life with a couple of examples, the budget contains an element of funding to make the next stages of implementation for Superloop 2. It continues and expands the feasibility and design around increasing the volume of and the proportion of LU stations that are step-free. But in all cases, we are reliant on the outcome of that settlement for the longer-term spending review regarding the pace at which we are able to progress on all of those priorities.
And in terms of the, obviously we've just had the unexpectedly early fares announcement last week on Friday. What was the impact of that on your budget? I know, because normally you would have a planning assumption of an inflationary increase, which obviously is subject to the Mayor's final decision, which we normally would expect in January, and then you adjust the expectation to the actual. What was the impact of the, what was it, 4.6% across the board on rail, and then the freeze on the tram and bus?
Yes, so the assumption that was contained in the submission that we made was for an overall increase of 3.6%. So although the Mayor's decision has been that that's not uniform, as you say, it's 4.6% on tube and rail and a freeze on buses, it actually is neutral overall compared with the assumptions we had in our submission.
Which was 3%, so the 4.6 and the 0 nets off at about 3.6.
At 3.6, yeah.
Okay, how convenient. And in terms of, I suppose coming back to you, Andy, on obviously the financial sustainability for the running cost going forward, what do you think are the main risks to achieving that, and what will be the consequences of not achieving it?
So thank you, Chair. So I think, I mean, firstly, as we've seen this year, passenger income is a risk. You'll have seen this year that although we continue to grow passenger income and ridership, which we're pleased about, it's not grown at the rate that we had forecast in our budget, and that's had a direct impact this year. So we are forecasting a more modest growth next year. If that were to again not be as high as we forecast, then clearly that is a risk, albeit we believe it is a prudent assumption that we're taking for next year and in line with other economic forecasts. The second element is also around costs. So we have our own savings plan, the £650 million of recurring savings that we committed to deliver by the end of 25-26. There is some risk around that, but we have a good track record of achieving our savings target. But we're now really into the more challenging elements of that, but we're confident we can do that. And then, of course, there's still some uncertainty around costs that are outside of our control. So inflation in particular, the uncertainty in terms of the impact on supply chain because of wider global events that are ongoing. We've been mitigating those over the last 2 or 3 years. So I would say they are the key elements, but I don't know if Rachel or Patrick would like to add anything else.
Thanks. I think on the income, the demand growth assumption, obviously, although we've continued to grow this year, it has been at a lower level than we had anticipated when we set the current year budget. Of course, growth in the immediate post-pandemic period has been very strong. 2 years ago, it was over 20%, it was 9%. We budgeted at 6%, and we're forecasting now to outturn around 2%. Actually, that returns growth to broadly the pattern we would have seen pre-pandemic. And therefore, that is the logic that we have applied. We do a whole range of scenarios in order to arrive at the most informed budget position that we can. And the kind of things we feed into that modelling are GDP, employment levels, and also assumptions about return to the office and commuter behaviour. So we think we've captured all of that. Now, that doesn't automatically mean there won't be further shocks and surprises, but that, we believe, is quite, as Andy said, quite a prudent assumption. And then if I may just build a little bit on the savings, which we do have a really good track record over, but it is super important and increasingly difficult as you get through more and more years of a savings programme. What gives us confidence at the moment is that built into the budget there is an assumed contribution reduction on pensions. That impacts on the staff cost line in the budget. We have agreement to that following the revaluation of the pension scheme, so that is an improvement that's secured. We also are seeing, following a lot of effort, reduction in some key indicators, so the proportion of temporary colleagues that we employ. We have worked hard this year and the numbers are falling as we, in general, try and convert those temporary appointments into permanent ones. We have a really substantial amount of contracts coming up for retender over the next 2 years, over 300 contracts, and that's just the ones that are over £1 million in value. And we've had quite a lot of success in kind of taking a really holistic pan-TfL approach to those procurements. And then we're accessing also things that improve our income. So we've retendered our advertising contract in the year. We haven't seen improvements in the current year because it comes into force from next financial year onwards. And we have negotiated a number of contracts where we get volume-related credits. So we have, as you can see, I hope from that, quite a real strong array of initiatives that enable us to really see where the savings as well as the income will come from.
Yeah. Two of the risks you mentioned, or sort of caught my ear, one was about return to work. I'd assumed that had stabilised, so presumably your assumptions about that are pretty low variance now, because it seems pretty clear what's happening.
They are, yes.
And on GDP, so the risk there presumably is just that if we have a recession or if just the growth stalls, which continues to stall, perhaps I suppose I should say, then that presumably is bad news in terms of people making journeys.
Yes, I mean, we don't generate our own forecasts of GDP.
No, I understand. But in terms of a risk, that's the risk you're looking at.
It is.
Okay. Final question from me then. So in terms of the operating surplus for the coming year, 25-26, what's the operating surplus that you're expecting for that year?
Perhaps, Patrick, you'd like to take that.
The Good morning. So the presentation of the TfL financials in the GLA budget submission is not quite the same we use as a management team in our TfL budget and business plan. That's why you can't directly see the operating surplus figure in these tables. Our forecast for this year that we discussed with the TfL board a couple of weeks ago was for a £23 million surplus. And we are projecting that to grow to between 60 and 70 million next year in 25-26.
Okay, thank you very much. So before I move on, I have an extra question from Assemblymember Harani.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, you mentioned about how difficult it is to predict passenger numbers and whether they'll be below or above what you're predicting. I mean, in the event that there is a surplus, so you have more passengers come in than predicted, what do you plan to do with the additional money?
So at high level, if we're fortunate to be in that position, that would clearly improve our operating surplus, and every pound of operating surplus we reinvest back into either our assets, our colleagues or our customers. So it'll be, if we end up with a higher surplus, that will enable us to progress at a slightly faster rate some of the items in our business plan. But Rachel, if you want to add anything additional to that.
You'll also include in your answer how you hope to deal with any shortfalls as well.
There are a number of levers that we, and by that I mean ERS levers that you pull, which we have got a good understanding of after the last few years. So the areas where we have discretionary expenditure and we can move in year if we see the results coming through differently. That's really, really important in terms of understanding where there is discretion and therefore how we can manage if there is a shortfall. But it's actually equally important if the numbers were to come through. As Andy has said, every single penny gets reinvested into the network. Now what we have is an increasingly mature understanding of where our priorities lie in terms of asset condition, and therefore we have a sort of we call it the green list, everything that's funded and prioritised, but there's also an amber list, so projects that could be brought forward with relative speed through that prioritisation process. So as I say, we've got levers not just around capital, but around discretionary elements of the operating expenditure, but also we have this prioritisation process that we operate for projects.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Andy, what will the £485 million government funding announced on the 30th of October be earmarked for? And what else is included in the £701 million ring-fence capital funding in TfL's capital plan?
Thanks and good morning. So the 485 million, I'll go high level, and then Patrick and Rachel can come in if as need be, is to enable us to continue with the committed spend that we have in a number of our capital programmes. So, for example, continue to progress the DLR fleet introduction, the Piccadilly line upgrade, which is both the new trains but also upgrades to track and power and the depots. It is also enabling us to progress the tender for the new tram fleet in Croydon, and it enables us to continue the early preparatory works for things like the Bakerloo line upgrade, as well as at the wider level our ongoing renewals programme across track and signalling, and of course completion of the Four Lines modernisation programme, which is the digital re-signalling of the subsurface railway. So that's the remaining elements of the Metropolitan line and the District line. So they're the big projects. It also enables us to do some of the smaller road programmes, and within the 485 it also includes the £24 million for the 10 additional Elizabeth line trains that were committed to by the previous government. The first of those will arrive towards the end of 2026. So they're the sort of high level numbers. Rachel or Patrick, if you'd like to add some detail.
I think those are the key elements that are included. As Andy said, the majority of those projects are long-term, multi-year contracts which were committed. In fact, the 4LM, DLR rolling stock and the PIC line are, getting into production, and we're looking forward to seeing those assets come into service. But that was the focus for the the current agreement for next year's funding.
No, thank you. That was very comprehensive. But so of that 485 million, and the 701 million pound ring fence that we were discussing earlier, how much of that is going towards the Elizabeth line specifically?
So that of the 485, 24 million pounds is specifically for the 10 new additional trains. That's in effect separate to our wider capital ask, because that was a separate agreement reached by the Secretary of State Harper. And then there'll be the assumption is additional payments over the next couple of years for that. The total cost of the rolling stock, I think, is about 222 million or thereabouts. So the Elizabeth Line rolling stock is not included in our core ask; it's separate agreement. So in effect, our actual capital grant from government for TfL specific items is 461 million.
Well, just to answer your question about the 701 million and why it's different from the 485. So in addition to that core funding that Andy and Rachel have described, we are eligible and are generally quite successful in securing other grant funding from mainly from government. So the two other main sources for next year are the Major Road Networks Fund. This is a fund managed by the DfT for investment in large road projects, which we've got a number of business cases proceeding through the DfT approval process. We expect that to release funding next year. And then finally, we have the Housing Infrastructure Fund, managed by MHCLG, that are funding a couple of our projects that are in delivery, including the improvements on the DLR.
Thank you all. Andy, we've heard a lot about this £485 million figure. Does any of that money include the pre-announced funding for the Piccadilly line trains? And if so, how much was that funding?
So this is, I'll defer to Rachel and Patrick, but this is new funding. So the Piccadilly line order was placed back in 2018, 2019, but it was never fully funded. And there was recognition in the funding conditions that we reached with government in August 22, if I get my years right, which the government recognised that TfL could not be held accountable for full funding of major rolling stock and major signalling upgrades. So it was always an understanding that government would provide the funding for completion of the Piccadilly line upgrade, DLR, rolling stock, Bakerloo line fleet in the future. So the contracts are committed. The funding was not 100% secured for the whole fleet. So the 485 doesn't include any pre-announced funding. It is new money to enable us to complete the contract.
So looking at the Chancellor's statement in October, the reason why I asked this question, because it's not abundantly clear, and I appreciate you've answered it well, but the government announced in, I think it was December 2023, the £250 million for the Piccadilly line upgrades, or whatever the money was for. When the government announced the new £485 million, perhaps it was worded poorly, or I don't know what it was. It sounded as if it included that £250 million figure. So you're confirming that is not the case?
Absolutely not. 250 million was for this current financial year, which did include an element for the Piccadilly line trains, because obviously there are payments that we had to make. You may or may not recall, as part of the fact we only got 250 million compared to our ask of 500 million, we had to renegotiate the contract with Siemens, which has deferred payments and also actually resulted in more trains being produced in Goole. So we had to offset that 250 million. So the 250 million for this year includes a chunk for the Piccadilly line trains. The 485 is the next amount of money. It's not all for the Piccadilly line, but includes the next amount of payments. It's not the same money. So it's 250 plus 485.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it. It's just poor government comms as usual, of any government, mind you. I don't want to be biased. Before we move on to you, Seb, I've got one final question on this bit. Andy, you said, in response to one of the questions to Assemblymember Garrett, you used the wording lack of funding from 2015 onwards. Now, from 2020 onwards, there was £6.9 billion of COVID plus additional money awarded, well, I say, for grant from the government to TfL. Now, I appreciate those were unique circumstances. But when you say not enough money, given what subsequently came during COVID, could you tell me what enough money would have been from 2015 onwards?
So I joined TfL in late 2019. As I have said, and my predecessors, so we're very grateful for the previous government for the £6 billion or so of operating grant that we received as a direct consequence of the pandemic and the impact to our ridership and income because of our reliance on the fare box. That was all operating grant. There was very little capital money. Their decisions made previously have led to there being no government funding in a number of years prior to the pandemic. And then, since then, because of the decisions we've had to make because of the lack of funding, we've led to a significant backlog in asset renewals and no major programmes being delivered. Had we had a consistent amount of capital funding, I can't say exactly what that number would be, but in a similar range to what we're asking for now, we would have made more progress in terms of fleet availability. We wouldn't have seen the issues on the Central Line, for example. The Central Line Improvement Programme would have been completed or close to completion. It was deferred for 2 to 3 years. We've had to make other decisions around overhaul of other rolling stock fleets, and we would have progressed some of the major projects quicker. Now, circumstances are such, the pandemic's had a big impact on that, but the decision to take TfL off those grants prior to COVID, I think, has had a detrimental impact. And that's why, it is my number one objective in terms of seeking a long-term government agreement for capital funding in the same way that all the other significant infrastructure management organisations in the UK have, Network Rail, National Highways being the two biggest ones. So that's why we're pushing for a 6-year agreement as part of the outcome of the CSR.
Great, thank you very much for that, Andy. Seb, what are the strategic programmes that sit under the Mayor's Transport theme?
Can I just start by, good morning. If I could just start by emphasising some of the points that have been made here. There is a very small club of transport authorities that have made a surplus on any operating income. And I think that small club, I'm only aware of one other member, Hong Kong. And of course, this is the first time in TfL's history that it's made this surplus. And it's really testament to the work that the team have done, the savings programme that Andy talked about, but also, of course, the enormous hard work and difficult decisions that have had to be made. And despite those difficult decisions, obviously we've made a huge amount of progress in delivering on many of the strategic priorities that the Mayor has, not just in the manifesto, but overall. And it's fantastic to see, for example, the rollout of 4G and 5G on the network, which has made a huge difference to the way in which people can enjoy and use their journeys and make better use of the time when they're travelling. We have delivered the renaming of the London Overground lines, which, again, is extremely important for removing the non-physical barriers that people face when travelling. We have frozen bus and tram fares, which is the most utilised form of transport on the network. And, of course, disproportionately, those on lower incomes use the bus and tram network. And we are continuing to deliver on our target to increase active travel. You ask on the strategic priorities, we are driven by the transport puns are plenty. We are driven by the 80% target on active and public transport by 2041. That is the number one strategic goal that we have. It's set in the MTS. It hasn't changed and it will not change. And it's the driving force behind all of the decisions that we make on targeting the priorities and making sure that we increase the options that people have for active and public transport. That's where our strategic focus is.
Great. Thank you very much, Chen. I'll leave it there.
Thanks. Just, Andy, you were talking about the position the TfL was in pre-pandemic. Obviously, during that period, the Mayor also froze fares for 4 years. Did that not also have an impact on TfL's income? There would have been 4 years of cumulative, assuming that it had risen in line with inflation, let's say, which was obviously TfL's planning assumption. would that not also have helped make big inroads into this capital renewals problem?
Well, I think, I mean, I obviously wasn't around at the time, but my view, having come in at the end of that, is actually it forced TfL to think differently around its cost base, and I think it ensured that my predecessors, particularly Mike Brown, had a good look at how TfL is operating and the costs and efficiencies that can be delivered. So I'm not sure that savings programme would have been delivered in the same way. I also think there would have been potential risk to ridership if the fares had just continued to go up. And I think actually if the fares had gone up, and clearly none of us knew the pandemic was going to come, if the fares had been even higher at the point at which the pandemic struck, it would have had a much longer term detrimental impact. But I don't know, Rachel, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, only to say, just building on Andy's final point, you know, the one of the aspects, and it's a complex situation, what's going on with TfL's demand, but one of the aspects we have definitely seen is perhaps greater sensitivity to price in bus and tram usage, and it's not the only factor, but that relationship between the price of travel and the volume of travel is something that we're seeing perhaps coming out of COVID and the cost of living crisis as being a bigger factor.
So if that's the case, why do you ask the Mayor to give you £123 million last year when he froze fares? If the fares freeze pays with itself through demand elasticity and so on?
So if I may, I don't think I was saying that it paid for itself. I was saying that there is a relationship between the two, exactly as you say, for elasticity. The funding that was provided to TfL in relation to the fares freeze was to rebalance the business plan because an increase had been assumed.
Yes, but you see the point I'm driving at. So there were 4 years of fares freeze, which, so I just asked you, do you not think that TfL would have been in a stronger position going into the pandemic in terms of capital renewals if that hadn't happened? And your answer seems to be a flat no. You've not acknowledged any impact of that at all on TfL's financial position. But the one fares freeze that occurred after the pandemic, I remember sitting here this time last year, Andy, and you saying that that was the Mayor's decision and he needed to make TfL whole for that decision. But you're telling me that there was no need to make TfL whole for the previous one because no whole previous 4 years, because no budget hole was created. I just find that hard to believe that 4 years of cumulative fares freeze had no impact on TfL's finances, but 1 year did, to the extent that you required the Mayor, or asked the Mayor nicely perhaps, to give you £123 million to fill that budget hole that you just described.
So I think the difference is that money that was secured to include in the budget compared with the business plan was a forward-looking assumption rather than a what was the impact of history.
Didn't all of your business plans through those previous 4 years, the 4 years of fares freezes before the pandemic, didn't each of your business plans in those years also have assumed an inflationary fares increase? So when the Mayor announced in each of those years he was freezing fares, surely that created I mean, the size of it would presumably have been smaller, but I just find it hard to believe that the number is zero for the cost of all of that.
So I don't think we're saying it's zero, Chair. I think what referenced my earlier response, which is TfL added a significant cost-saving programme to offset whatever going. Rachel and I weren't here when that decision was taken. We weren't involved in the budget or business planning process for the period from 2016 up to 2020. But that's why I think Mike Brown and his team at the time put in a significant savings plan to offset any assumed benefit they were going to get from the fares. But we can write to the committee afterwards and compare that. The point last year was we had, in our budget and business plan, we had assumed a fares increase of a certain level, and the Mayor kindly agreed to make good that shortfall so that we retained a balanced budget.
Yeah. I suppose my point is that I just find it, everybody's very enthusiastic about saying, isn't it awful that the government deprived TfL of money that they could have had, but no one seems to recognise that 4/5 years of fares, well 4 because the fifth one he made TfL whole, but 4 years of fares freezes, no one appears to ever be willing to say that was a problem. And I just don't find that credible. So if you could write to us if you have an estimate of what that cost. I don't want to dwell on it now. I think perhaps I feel we're in danger of coming back and circling back on what you originally said. So
Happy to write to the committee on that, and also the difference between fares income versus capital settlement as well, in terms of quantum each year.
thank you. Yes. So actually, before we finish on this section, Assemblymember Hall, I think you had an extra question.
Thank you. Just a couple. First of all, yes, Andy, congratulations on the surplus to you and your team. And just to confirm, you have said that fares going up will affect ridership. You've said it before. You've just said it again. I'm just qualifying that is what you've just said.
No, I don't think the fares going up will affect ridership.
You don't think it will?
No.
Okay. Right, we'll park that for a minute. The first question that came to you was about manifesto commitments. So, Seb, nobody knows better than me the amount of manifesto commitments that were made around transport. So, can you confirm that you're confident that all the manifesto commitments made by Sadiq Khan will actually be achieved?
Absolutely. It's a priority, obviously, for GLA and the Mayor's team to ensure that TfL deliver on the manifesto commitments. And I think, in reference to the first question, obviously we have that capital settlement for this coming financial year, and the signs are encouraging in terms of the longer-term multi-year settlements. You'll have seen the devolution white paper yesterday, for example, which sets out the government's thinking on how local authorities and mayoral authorities will be funded with regards to transport. And there are certainly some really good signs and good conversations taking place with government. So the progress that is being made within the current settlement gives me a lot of confidence. And obviously, when we have the discussions with government on securing that multi-year funding, that will then enable TfL to continue to deliver and achieve the manifesto.
So by the end of the 4 years, the 30-odd that I've found here will be achieved?
I have every confidence they will. Of course, many will be achieved in advance of that. Many already have.
Good, good. OK, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
OK, that's it, I think, for our opening context section, as we like to call it. So we now move on to a series of sort of specific topics, first one of which is environment and climate budgeting with Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just going to circle back to the last question to the Deputy Mayor about the strategic programme sitting under the Mayor's transport theme. You said, and I was very glad to hear, that the 80% active travel and public transport commitment in the Mayor's transport strategy by 2041 is sort of very much in there. But I just wanted to check, are there any parts of the Mayor's transport strategy that are not part of the transport theme? And is the theme closer to a business plan where you're focusing on what you expect to fund rather than delivering everything that's in the transport strategy?
I think you're referring to the governance structure, the GLA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the mandates, as are structured, are designed to deliver across different policy areas, of course, which transport is a key area. Transport policy is still and will continue to be guided by the MTS. The MTS provides the overall framework. The mandates then provide the delivery mechanisms throughout the GLA's policy programme on how they're delivered. So there is no aspect of the MTS that isn't deliverable through the governance structures that the GLA have in terms of the mandates. Does that make sense?
Okay, so everything that's in the MTS is potentially deliverable under the mandates. But what's being planned for and budgeted for may not be everything that's in the MTS.
Again, it goes back to the business plan process, the budgeting process, and the asks for capital funding from central government. Obviously, that will determine the staging and the delivery timelines, but absolutely, there's no aspect that isn't foreseen as being part of that process. There's no bit of the MTS or bit of the mandates that are not foreseen to be funded.
Okay, thank you very much. So then moving on to the section that I'm meant to be covering, which is on environment and climate budgeting. Andy, what are the biggest new environment initiatives that TfL expects to fund and deliver in the 25-26 year?
Thanks very much for the question. As we did last year, we follow the same process in terms of climate budget, and our objective still to try and get TfL to net zero by 2030, which is a big ask. I think there are 2 or 3 key things that we are really focusing on. The first is how can we accelerate the rollout of the fully zero-emission bus fleet by 2030. The original plan was 2034, and we're doing some quite interesting work around the opportunities around that. That obviously covers not just the vehicles, but also the infrastructure and the power that would be required to enable 9,000 buses to be fully zero emission across London. I'm really excited by the potential opportunities that we're working on that hopefully will make some progress during the first year of the budget. We're also making progress around power purchase, and I know Rachel will be happy to talk in more detail around that. We're continuing to focus on reduction in carbon emissions across the whole of TfL's operations. We're also just launched our solar private wire initiative, looking to see if we can partner with organisations who can provide direct solar energy to our infrastructure and our assets, and of course continue to push on our climate adaptation programme, so both in terms of working with boroughs around road schemes, sustainable urban drainage, as well as making sure our own network remains resilient to significant events, be they heat, be they cold, be they flooding, etc. We're also, within this budget, we will have a fully zero-emission TfL car fleet, and we're also aiming to have our dial-a-ride fleet zero-emission by the end of the decade as well. But Rachel, I don't know if there's anything you or Patrick would like to add.
So would it be helpful to update a little on the PPA?
I was going to come to the PPA next, so
okay.
I've got a couple of supplementaries
Right,
actually on what Andy's just said. So maybe we should take it step by step. So Andy, just on the decarbonisation of TfL buildings, how much do you know about energy usage in your buildings, and what challenges are you expecting in decarbonising the estate?
So personally, I don't have the data to hand, but we're spending a lot of time analysing exactly what we're doing across our buildings. We are also rolling out, as you know, full LED lighting replacement across our stations and depots. We've already done that across our bus shelters, and we're working with boroughs around our street lights. We're installing new meters in our buildings so that we can track specifically how each building is, what energy usage it is consuming, and that will enable us to ascertain what more we need to do.
What's your sort of timescale for because there's a lot of buildings. What's your timescale for getting that sort of tighter metering into place?
I don't have that to hand, but I can certainly write to you after the
let us know on that. That would be very helpful. So basically, once you've got that measuring in place, you'll then have more of an idea of what the risks might be in terms of actually being able to deliver.
Well, and also, where should we put in our specific focus? So where we will get the best value more quickly. To make the biggest impact more quickly as well.
Yeah, thank you. And then also, just in relation to the resilience that you were and the climate adaptation that you were mentioning, has the London Climate Resilience Review led to any new work within TfL on climate-related investment, in particular looking at your ability to manage risk?
So we played an active role in that review. Lily Matson, our Chief Safety, Health, Environment Officer, was heavily involved, and her team. So I don't have the specifics to hand, and again can write to you afterwards. But yes, we've absolutely taken the actions from the review and see how they can be applied to us more widely, and also any specifics in the budget. But we can write to you to confirm what those specifics are.
That would be very helpful if you were to write on that. So moving to Rachel on power purchase agreements, which I first raised with the Mayor back in 2017 when I spotted that TfL was only using 0.01% of renewable power, or of that power coming from renewable sources. So I'm really glad to see that power purchase agreements are kind of getting closer to being an actual thing. So what is the latest position on TfL's procurement of renewable energy through power purchase agreements?
So thank you. Recognising my moment now. Yes, so alongside zero-emission bus volumes, the power purchase agreements and the shift to renewable energy are the two most significant things we can do to reduce our operational emissions. TfL's the largest electricity consumer in London, as you know, and the cost of that currently is well in excess of £300 million a year. PPAs have, we have been in the market, I think we spoke about this last year, for some time. And we have found that it is a market which is still developing. It was significantly affected by all the market volatility in wholesale energy prices. And it has taken us some time to get through this procurement process. Whilst we're really keen to get into the commitment of the contract and the commencement of the renewable energy, of course, it's all incremental sources. That's the key point about it. I do want to kind of reiterate that these are long-term agreements. They're 15-year or 20-year agreements. They expose TfL to risk because it is very difficult. Even the global experts find it very difficult to predict what will happen to wholesale energy prices over anything like that time scale. And of course, there is construction risk and financing risk, etc. There's also the requirement to enter into an agreement with another party, which has to be back-to-back with the renewables builder, because of course you need to balance the supply of energy if the renewables facility, whether that's solar or wind, isn't fully operational because the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. So I'm sort of not too ashamed about the length of time, because I really want this to be right. It is our first foray into this. It will shift 5%, possibly closer to 10%. We are in a good place. We had a recent finance committee which approved in principle the selection of a successful bidder for that. We are in the closing stages of commercial negotiations as I speak, but it is good progress to report. All of the learning that we are getting from this process we will take into our next round. Ultimately, while our strategy says we will get up to, I think it's 70% of our energy from renewable sources. So next summer, we hope to be getting into market again for the next round of PPAs, but we will do so with the benefit of all of the learning we've had on PPA 1.
Thank you. That's incredibly exciting to hear that you've been working through it all, and I do appreciate it. It's a very, very complex piece of work. Now, I understand that Tesco's have now got to a point where they've got 45% of their expected 2030 energy demand covered by renewable agreements, and they've announced a project that is 10% of their energy demand. So they seem to be acting at a significant pace, but is TfL going more slowly just because of the scale of the energy demand that that TfL has? Is that?
I mean, I don't know the specifics of what Tesco are doing, but I would imagine their requirements are quite different, obviously spread across the whole nation. As we are the largest electricity user in London, as you've already, we use more electricity than the whole city of Birmingham. And it's all very concentrated into a small geographical area. So I think for us, the critical thing is making sure we get this right and making sure that we have continuity of supply. It will be interesting. We will see if we can reach out to Tesco's to understand what they are doing and where there are similarities, because we're keen to learn from anybody who's making more progress on this.
Yep. And once you are buying large amounts of renewable power, do you expect TfL to be able to influence investment in renewable energy production in areas around London?
Certainly that would be our goal. I mean, we're already, the potential PPA would be an area close to London, but not within Greater London. It needs to be the right location with the right available space to create new opportunities. But as we also said, some of the solar private wire would be within London, if not the majority of it. So again, we're looking at how we can maximise both within Greater London, but also where we need things on scale, where there's available land available to do that.
And are you planning any engagement with the communities near where these projects are happening, and to enable those communities to also benefit from some of that renewable power? Is there a kind of is that kind of dialogue part of your process?
We would obviously undertake all appropriate consultation, and if there's opportunity for the local community to benefit, then we'd be very keen to do that if the source and capability of the scheme is such that that enables it.
That's very, very good to hear. And then just a final question. How much additional funding would be required in 25-26 to put TfL on target to achieving the zero-emission bus fleet by 2030?
Yeah, so we'll possibly take that away and come back with a precise answer. Because as Andy said, it isn't just the vehicles, there's also the expansion of the infrastructure and the power. So exactly how that would fit into a single budget year, I think, is something we'll take away and come back to you on, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks. Actually, just a couple of quick questions on that. On bus upgrades, so I've been, so this, one of my local bus garages in Sutton has obviously now been converted. We had a lovely trip there. One thing I noticed is that it uses up quite a lot of space. I think there are 2 new substations that have been put in next to that garage. It's kind of a slightly, not remote, it's in the middle of the town centre, but there's land around it to do that. And then I think about some of the other bus garages, like the one in South Croydon. It's basically hemmed in by buildings on all sides. So I assume there's a logic of why you chose to do Sutton, for example, before South Croydon. So as you progress down that road of electrifying the bus fleet, are there some garages that you're looking at and thinking, we don't yet know how to solve that problem? There must be a couple.
There are, absolutely. And even because of the way current charging in the UK is done, more space is required than there is with diesel garages, because you can literally fill the bus up, move it, and then park it. So we're looking at also, is there a different infrastructure that can be put in place? For example, in Australia, they use gantry charging, which means you can potentially put more or have less impact in space. But it is quite possible that we might need some additional facilities as we get towards the end of the programme, at the end of the decade. So we're very aware that garage constraints is a big challenge and could be a hindrance to us, which is why we're working on that now.
Yeah, no, it's the usual 80-20 principle, I suppose, that you're currently in the 80-bit, and presumably there's a 20-bit that you're squinting at and wondering, okay. I was going to say scratching your head. You were literally scratching your head. I was about to say that. I thought that would be an unfortunate
That was not to do with that.
No. And in terms of solar, I think when I kind of did a back-of-envelope calculation, I think your power demand is something like 200 megawatts, something like that. Roughly how much solar is it that you're buying? And, well, I'll come to my and in a second, actually. So roughly how much solar capacity is it that you're buying?
So it's too early to say, I think, is the answer. We're currently out in the marketplace looking for partners in a framework agreement who will, to the point about acceleration, help us move more quickly to identify sites for solar and bring them forward. That framework enables us to look for sites either on TfL land or on other sources of land. So we're trying to be open-minded, but to the point that's been made, we would like to learn more. And so our first step, I think we're expecting responses back to this before Christmas, actually, is to look for those partners, and then that will give us a sense of how quickly and at what scale.
Okay, and the other part that was interesting, what you said, just very quickly, obviously, so my train that I got on this morning on the Jubilee line, it was still dark when I got on that train, and I'm quite glad that I didn't have to push it. So in terms of there being, backup sources of power, particularly this time of year when the days are very short, presumably once this agreement is all in place, you mentioned obviously needing a back-to-back agreement, so when the solar isn't, or wind, or what have you, isn't working, there's something else. I think one of the things that I'm quite interested in is to understand the total cost of that, where you need to obviously have the paired supply, so solar when it's working, and I don't know, gas probably when it isn't. Quite interested in presumably the figures in terms of the total cost of that. You'll have that. You better share that with us once the PPA's done, will you? Or maybe you have that already.
Sorry,
cost per megawatt of buying X amount of solar, and alongside that, Y amount of gas in parallel, or whatever else, whatever on-demand source you would buy.
I see. So actually, Chair, we can provide that because it was part of, we did a whole range of analysis for Finance Committee before taking this decision to them. Part of that is our sort of blended modelling of those future requirements. So we have that as one of the comparators and can provide that.
Okay, I'll be really interested in that. Thank you very much. Don't see any other questions on that. So that takes us to our next section, which is fares with Assembly Member Roberts.
There we go. Good morning. This is a question for Seb. Does the March 2025 TfL fares increase mark the end of the Mayor's manifesto commitment to freeze fares as long as economic conditions allow?
Thank you for the question. This is very cheeky of me, but if I could just mention, because it hasn't been mentioned, we have the largest zero-emission bus fleet in Western Europe, and it's a huge, again, testament to the work of the TfL and the operators in doing that. And I think we have the second largest bus fleet in the world after Shanghai, although I think we might need to verify that, but it shows the scale of the challenge and the huge work that's been done. Sorry, I had to put that in.
It's all right.
Thank you for your question. No, it doesn't, because, of course, bus and tram fares are frozen, and this is a hugely important part of the picture because we're always aware, of course, of the balance that has to be struck between any decision on fares that increases the income that TfL receives, which obviously every year through inflation and through many other aspects might ordinarily be assumed to reduce if you don't increase the fares, against the impact that would have on ridership. Of course, it's important to note that with the fares freezes that the Mayor has already had in place since his first term, that fares are some 12% lower now than they would otherwise have been. So the impact of fares freezes past continues to be felt on the fares that passengers face today. So the impact of the fares freeze is not just, as I say, a one-time thing. It has a recurring impact and reduces the corresponding cost to passengers for many years hence.
Okay, so the intention is to keep buses and trams frozen. Does it mark the end of the commitment on tube and train?
No, I mean, the commitment is there. Obviously, the risks that we have heard already from the other panel members as to the impact on TfL's revenue means that there are a number of different factors that the Mayor has to obviously take into account. The national rail fare increase as well is another impact. And of course the government also has to look at the balance between what it's asking of passengers in London and other parts of the country versus what capital support it's able to provide different transport authorities. So as ever, these things are always a balance, but as I say, the Mayor has retained the fares freeze for bus and tram, and the impact of fares freezes on all modes past has reduced the cost of travel, even with the increase that he announced last week.
Okay, so what would the impact be in future years, say in 2027, perhaps, of the Mayor deciding to bring back the fares free, to bring back the fares freeze on tube and train as well? And what modelling are you undertaking in order to ensure that the finances will be there to support that?
So obviously defer on the modelling to Rachel and Patrick, but in terms of the decision, obviously it's an annual decision that the Mayor makes. It's a decision that is wholly within the Mayor's gift, and the Mayor has to take into account a whole range of different considerations. Obviously, the impact on the passenger in the context of the cost of living crisis, in the context of all of the other increases in costs that we all know about, versus the affordability of the network, versus the need, obviously, to have sufficient revenue from fares to match increased costs to ensure that TfL can continue to be self-sufficient on operational costs, but notwithstanding the fact, of course, that we and any transport authority will always need support on capital costs. So that balance has to be taken into account every single year. You asked about 2027. It will be the same consideration of balances in 2027.
Okay. Rachel, have you been doing any modelling, if the Mayor or Patrick?
So, as I was saying earlier, we do comprehensive modelling.
Yeah.
We make a forward assumption about fares, which is RPI, for future years. But as the Deputy Mayor has said, it is entirely within the Mayor's discretion, and it's something that he comes to each and every year using all of those available factors.
Okay. Just one further question, if I may, for you. Did the Mayor discuss with you how he may be able to avoid not having the freeze, if you forgive me? Sorry, I've got a bit of a head cold. But, ignoring the government diktats to say you need to increase the fares on tubes and trains.
Sorry if I've sorry.
No, that's right. Did he have those discussions with you
no.
about how we might be able to avoid removing the freeze?
No, we obviously model a whole range of different outcomes, but no.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Good morning. So, Rachel, you talked about greater price sensitivity on buses and trams. Seb, you've talked about those on lower incomes using buses and tram network to a far greater extent. Even with the other increases in place, come March, April next year, buses will only be 25p more expensive than they were when Sadiq came in, and even cheaper if you compare that with the Hopper. Of course, you might have previously had to pay for 2 bus journeys in each direction, now only 1. What was the rationale behind making that decision to freeze bus fares?
As you say, the bus fares are among the lowest in the country. In fact, they are among the lowest in Western Europe. And that's very important because, as you say, the bus, I said it was the most used form of transport. And of course, it is, I talked about having the largest zero-emission fleet in Western Europe and the second largest fleet, potentially, have to verify this, after Shanghai. So it is a hugely important part of the transport network. And a key factor in the Mayor's decision-making will, of course, have been the disproportionate impact of the cost of living crisis on certain income groups, and recognising that the bus is the kind of workhorse, if you like, of the transport network. It gets people to huge parts of the city. Of course, well over 95% of Londoners live within 400 metres of a bus stop, and the bus being on many routes 24 hours a day, of course, serves many communities throughout the course of the day and the night. So it's a hugely important part of the network, and that impact, I think, on disproportionate impact on lower income groups will have been a key factor in the Mayor's decision. Of course, the spectre of inflation affects every part of everyday life. It's not just the cost to passengers, it's also obviously the cost to service providers as well, which is why the fare rise on other modes would have been considered necessary. But in terms of protecting, where possible, the value of much cheaper travel for certain forms of transport, that would have been a key consideration for the Mayor.
So very much taking into account the affordability for those on lowest incomes. Many people who work night shifts and other shift work will be dependent on the buses to get to and back from work. If we take into account bus costs versus inflation since that time, 2016, so if we took into account inflation from 2016 to now, we should see buses have increased to £2.1, I think, if you use the calculation. The increase has actually been half that amount during that time. You've talked, Seb, about, in terms of the rail services, it being around 12% lower than what it would have been if the government had dictated what those charges would be, even with the increase for next year. How are you going to make sure going forward that our network continues to be amongst the most affordable in the country and Western Europe?
It's a good question. I think recognising obviously that TfL as the Integrated Transport Authority has jurisdiction over different forms of transport, and recognising of course that many people don't just stick to one particular form of transport, so increases will obviously have an impact including on a number of bus users of course, but the aspect of the transport network that we don't often talk about is the fare capping and the fact that if you use the transport system regularly, the costs that you incur are very much comparable to international competitors as well. So we are in a situation where people who travel fairly regularly on the network don't pay very much more than people in other cities around the world. And they pay very much less than passengers in other parts of the country as well. We're lucky in London, obviously, to have had a system that has well developed, that has developed over many, many decades. Of course, we have the oldest underground system in the world, and I think Paris probably invented the omnibus, but we have certainly one of the oldest bus systems and networks in the world. And that scale of development is something that we are very much focused on going forward. So there are many parts of the city where access to public transport and active travel is extremely high, and people use it accordingly. I often use this example when we talk about the 80% target. The City of London is at 98%, so well done to the City of London. But obviously the geography and nature of different parts of the capital means that many parts are below that. And it is in those areas where we want to focus on the provision of a much more accessible network. PTAL, apologies for the acronym, is obviously the measurement of access to public transport in any given area, and the PTAL figures in many parts of outer London lag behind inner London. And so focusing on increasing that rating in outer London is very much what we want to do. And the bus, by the way, will be a main part of that. Of course, we've seen the Superloop network, which is a huge innovation in the way of thinking, not just obviously in providing express bus services, but actually town centre to town centre travel in outer London, which is an increasingly important part of travel demand patterns. Enhancing that with the Superloop 2 as well is a very important part of plugging communities into a rapidly expanding and better provided for bus network. That will be a huge focus going forward.
That's incredibly encouraging to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure we can quite say that town centre express buses are new, because the X26 has been going through my patch for a few years now, back to a previous mayor, as I recall. Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Going back to something Assemblymember Roberts was asking, Seb, did you or the Mayor lobby the government to remove the requirement for a 4.6 TfL fares increase?
So I think we have to make very clear there's no requirement. It's, as I say, a balance that the Mayor has to make in terms of the cost to the passenger and the cost to TfL of providing the service, which of course is the same balance that the government has to make when the government sets national rail fares, as has been the case now for many years, and what the government would expect, really, of transport authorities to which the government provides necessary capital funding. As I said, every single transport authority in the world, and certainly in this country, requires capital funding from government. And I think it's only natural that the government would then have an expectation on what transport authorities do in terms of fare setting. But to make it very clear, there's no requirement, or I think Assemblymember Roberts used the word diktat earlier. That's not the case. It remains completely the Mayor's discretion as to how he sets the fares. But of course, that balance applies as much to government as it does to the Mayor himself.
Okay, so did the government say that if you don't put the fares up, we won't capital fund whatever? Was there anything?
No.
Nope, so it's completely down to the Mayor's decision to now increase fares?
So there's no
Just so we're clear.
Yeah, no, be very clear. The government did not say you must put the fares up by X amount, otherwise this will happen. But it's very clear from the letter that the government sent that any decision that the Mayor takes on fares will obviously have an impact on the balance that the government would consider in future capital funding settlements. And that's, as I say, comes back to the discussion we had earlier about the comprehensive spending review, the expectation that government would have on TfL and other transport authorities around the country. And of course, the level of fares that you set will then have an impact on the discussions on what the future comprehensive spending review settlement will be.
I get all that, but I'm just referring back to manifesto commitments, you know, when you commit to do something.
Sorry, could I just check? I'm just looking here at the Mayor's press release, and I quote from it. In a letter to the Mayor, government ministers made it clear they expected TfL tube and rail fares to rise in order to secure future national funding for London. That was the Mayor's own statement. Yes. And I think that's what Assemblymember Hall was saying, and you seem to be contradicting it.
No, I'm not contradicting it at all. In fact, I believe I used the word expect in terms of what government expect from transport authorities. But that's not a diktat, that's not a requirement, that is an expectation. And of course, because it will have an impact on the discussion going forward on future funding settlements, that expectation is very clear. It's clear in the letter, it's clear in the press release, and I hope it's clear in what I'm saying.
Okay, well, anyway, we're very clear now. Assemblymember Hall.
Yes, I'm sure we'll come back to this. Anyway, Patrick. What is driving the lower growth in passenger journeys in 24-25 of 1.6% compared to the 6% that you anticipated 12 months ago?
Thank you. So there have been a range of factors that have impacted passenger demand, which is still growing this year, has grown throughout this year. But as you have pointed out, it has grown slower than our expectation in our original budget for this financial year. So we've looked at this in some detail. I think the largest factor have been macroeconomic factors, which have impacted the drivers of passenger demand in London. So overall, the economic performance has been slightly slower growth than expected and flatlined in some cases. And that then breaks down into the drivers of both tube and bus demand. So in terms of tube demand, that's highly correlated with employment, and particularly employment in central London, which has been growing slower than expected, although there has been more employment growth in outer London, but that generates fewer tube and rail commuter trips. And then, as we talked about before, the importance of affordability for bus passengers that have been impacted by the cost of living crisis, and although real incomes nationally are growing, in London due to housing costs, that actually leaves less disposable income than other parts of the country in terms of that real income growth. So we think those two factors are reducing the growth in commuting trips and in leisure trips and off-peak trips, respectively. And then finally, as Assemblymember Garrett mentioned at the start, in terms of the return to the office, our budget for this year had an assumption that the post-pandemic trend of increased office attendance would still be an impact, a positive impact on demand, albeit at a slower rate. And I think we've seen that broadly hit an equilibrium from the data we have so far. So it's been a combination of weaker economic performance, that slowing down in the return to the office have been the key factors that have led to that slower growth that we've experienced.
Okay, thank you. Do you anticipate things getting even worse because that disastrous budget with the increased costs to employers? If you talk to the big employers, they're saying they'll probably employ fewer people. They have to come into London. That will affect, that certainly will affect people coming into town on the railway, certainly, or the underground. Do you think that post-Christmas things will get much worse, especially if we go into recession?
No, we don't. So, as Rachel said earlier on in the meeting, we don't make our own economic projections, but we use the Office of Budget Responsibility's economic projections, and the fantastic GLA economics team also produce some London-specific forecasts, which we take and include in our modelling. And our projections are for broadly the same level of growth next year, actually a slight increase. So, as Rachel said earlier, We're currently forecasting 1.8% passenger demand growth this year. We expect that to increase very marginally to about 2.1%, but broadly at the same rate of underlying growth that we've experienced pre-pandemic.
Okay, so you don't have any thoughts on it. You literally go to other people for their projections, really.
We think it's important that we use independent and credible
I get that. I'm just thinking, I know if I was running a very big company as you are, and you've been doing it successfully, you obviously have got your finger on the pulse. And given that employers are saying they're going to employ fewer people, given that we could easily go into a recession, your finance people, I would have thought that you would have been concerned about that, if nothing else. But I hear what you say. Rachel, why is the budget assumption for the fares increased to set at 3.6%?
Do you mean in the budget for 25-26? So that would have been at. I'm pausing because I'm hoping Patrick may be able to remember exactly which OBR forecast it was, but it would have been the expected RPI at a point in time based on one of those external forecasts.
Right. Okay. And when will you make adjustments if you have to, or will you do it before, or I mean, when will any adjustments be made?
Well, obviously the budget that we've submitted is a draft, so we continue to test all of the assumptions, and we will do through to completion of the Mayor's process and the approval of the TfL budget by the TfL board. But in terms of the fares assumption, as I was saying at the beginning of the meeting, the decisions that the Mayor has taken are neutral with the budget assumptions we have, so we're not seeing a need to adjust the passenger income forecast currently.
Okay. I mean, because it is key because of your income. I asked you earlier, will higher fares increase impede passenger growth? I thought you had said it would. You've just said you don't think it is. The Mayor has constantly said it would, which is why he put in a freeze. So where do you stand on that? Do you not think that if prices go up, it will affect ridership or not? Because the Mayor has always said it would. You, earlier, when I questioned you, said you didn't think it would. Who is right?
So when I responded earlier, I was talking about the increase that we now know for next year, and we think that aligns with what our budget assumption was, 3.6. 4.6 plus a fares freeze on bus and tram is neutral from that perspective. And we think when aligned with the independent forecast that Patrick has referred to, that will enable us to see our ridership grow by the 1.8 rising to 2.1. Now, clearly, if there was a very, very significant change in fares, that would have an impact. So if you suddenly decided to charge £10 for a bus fare, that would clearly have a huge impact. So in my response, I was referring to the decision that we now know, and equally in response to what our budget assumption was.
Okay. Andy, what is TfL's current view on dynamic pricing? And has this been informed by the Off-Peak Fridays trial?
So, as you know, we don't do dynamic pricing. We have our fares set across the organisation. We're just finalising the work on the Friday fares trial. That report will be published very soon. I think there is more work to be done across the whole wider public transport industry, and the government, both the previous government and this government, are keen to look at what more can be done, particularly to simplify and make rail fares easier to understand and ensure there's better value for the passengers. And we will be actively involved in those discussions with DfT, the current rail groups, and of course GBR going forward, because I think there is potential opportunity there. But dynamic pricing has had a lot of headlines in other sectors. I certainly don't want us to be caught up in any sort of controversy from that perspective. But we need to look at whether or not there are new and innovative ways to encourage demand onto the network, particularly during the week, because what we have seen is our ridership is recovering well. We're well over 90% now, And despite the cost of living and economic challenges, we are seeing good ridership at weekends and particularly in the evenings, Thursdays and Fridays. So people are keen to come into the city if they've got an event or a reason to travel in. So what more we can do to influence that. And we do a lot of work with our partners in the hospitality, entertainment, leisure sector to see how we can incentivise people to use our network. So whether it's with historic royal palaces or some of the arts and entertainment organisations, so that people can get a discount when they attend events if they show their TfL ticket. There's a number of partnerships around. So that's something we're already doing, and I'm keen to see how we work with the wider rail industry around a simplified fare structure for the future.
Okay, yes, and you mentioned value for money, of course, which is what we all want. So do you think spending £24 million on the off-peak Fridays trial was good value for money?
So we'll publish, the report will be published imminently. It will demonstrate what impact and benefit it had. The Mayor committed up to £24 million for us to do that trial with ourselves and National Rail, and those findings will be available very soon.
When's very soon? In a couple of months, or?
I'm hoping certainly within the next few weeks.
Okay, that's good to hear. Talking about the off-peak, do the nominees, the nominee passes that you give to friends and family of TfL workers, do they work before 9 o'clock in the morning?
Yes, I do.
So friends and family of TfL workers can use their passes before 9, but pensioners who are forced to work and say they need the money aren't able to get that same perk.
So each member of staff is entitled to one nominee pass. They don't have any restrictions on them, that's correct.
Do you think that's fair?
I think it's part of a competitive offering to make sure we recruit and retain the best people across TfL. It also includes staff who work for some of our supply chain partners as well, so bus operators, etc. So it's around making sure we can make sure we have the best people working for us and remain competitive with other sectors and other organisations. That it's a very competitive recruitment market.
I would say you're quite competitive without that. But, I mean, how many nominee passes do you think there are out there? Well, you should know. I'm sure you know.
I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I'm happy to write to you afterwards with the number.
I'd be grateful. Thank you for that. And Andy, what additional revenue-raising options are you pursuing to reduce TfL's reliance on fare income?
So I'll ask Patrick and Rachel to come in a moment, but you may recall at the start of the pandemic, we were about 75% of our income was reliant on the fare box. We've now reduced that down to around 63%, give or take.
That's good.
A large chunk of that has been as a result of the great work from our property company, so we get greater income through Places for London. We've also done a huge amount of work on our commercial partnerships, a very successful working with our two suppliers in the advertising space who have seen a significant uptick in revenue from that, as well as some of the partnerships we've done across the wider network. So they're two of the key elements, but Rachel.
I think Andy's actually covered the main points. I mean, I did mention earlier we've retendered our advertising contracts this year and announced the two successful bidders going forward, and those contracts start in April of 2025. They included quite a lot of innovation in thinking about approaches to customer, broadening the range of the use of data, the digitisation of advertising. So we see that as an interesting opportunity going forward, because we completely share the point of view that you're making, that the reliance on passenger income, it would be good if that were increasingly balanced. And it's great that you brought it down. That's really very positive. I must say, though, there's been some real controversy over some of the advertising. I don't know if you must be aware of that. I mean, some of it, I'm quite appalled. Are you at any point going to relook at the guidelines around this? I mean, there's so many things that contradict each other. You can't put a wedding cake on it, but, you know, and some there was an actor having to hold a cucumber because he couldn't have a beef burger or
or a hot dog in his hat. I mean, it would be laughable if it wasn't so serious, because if you could actually get that right, I'm sure the income would be a lot greater. Knowing I was going to be talking to you about this today, on my very long journey into this place this morning, there were so many of your own adverts on those plank things. If that could be sold out, that would bring in a much bigger income. So will you look at that?
So we do keep our advertising policy under review, and we always do a review when there's been an ad that has caused some disquiet for some communities or companies. We also use the space for our own advertising. It's important that we use that to advertise the nature of the fairs that we're having. We use it for our campaigns around active bystander and the campaign against reducing violence against women and girls. So that is our estate that we use that for as well. We have really strong demand from the market to advertise on our space, whether it's in stations or on trains, and we're looking at ways to innovate that wherever we can, but we'll always keep it under review.
Good, because I think some of the decisions there are crazy. Last question. How much money has TfL raised from tube station sponsorship over the last year, and is that figure likely to increase in the coming year?
I don't have that to hand, but happy to write to you afterwards, and I do hope that we can increase it, because it's a very lucrative source of income. Clearly there was some controversy, particularly over the Bond Street scheme a year or so ago. We've reviewed our processes and also ensure we have a much more robust EQIA in place for schemes of that nature. But I do hope it will increase, but we'll write to you afterwards.
Lovely.
With the number.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Chairman.
Several other people interested in questions. I've got Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to return to picking a scab, but they're always the most enjoyable ones. Sky News, October the 13th. A direct quote from the Mayor. Following the government's budget, ministers made clear that to secure national funding for key transport projects in the future, TfL tube and rail fares would need to increase in line with national rail fares. That's not an expectation, that's a requirement. It's to say you either put your fares up or you don't get the money. Would you agree? And that's the Mayor's direct quote.
Look, we're in danger of having a debate on semantics here. I think I've made it very clear that the government has a balance that it needs to consider between the expectations that it puts on transport authorities to pass costs on to passengers versus the amount of support that it's willing to give transport authorities on capital, and in regards to other authorities, operational expenditure as well, although that's not the case with TfL because of the surplus. I think it's very, very clear from both the letter that the government sent and the wording that the Mayor has put out that any decision not to increase tube and rail fares would have had a consequence on future funding, which is the discussion we had at the beginning about the need to secure a capital settlement for the CSR, which is what Rachel and her team are engaged in now. I think that was clear in what I said, but if it wasn't, apologies. No,
my interpretation of what you said was there was an expectation, which meant that it could be taken or left.
And indeed it can, but that obviously comes with consequences.
Okay. So that my residents who rely heavily on the train and those in other areas that rely heavily on the tube, what would have been the threat to, which projects would have been put under threat if you hadn't met the government's expectation?
I mean, entirely hypothetical, but one would expect, well, because we obviously, that would be part of the discussion with government going forward on the CSR and the multi-year settlement that we hope to be able to secure. It would have been, I think it's reasonable to assume, a case where the government would have said, well, because fares were not increased on tube and rail, this means that there's a gap between what we would expect you to have raised through that and what we're able to provide. It would then be up to, obviously, TfL to determine what projects that would impact.
Okay. Just in terms of, now that we're in the realm of breaking manifesto commitments and what have you, have we had to now scrap any proposed schemes which would have incentivised additional ridership, such as the Friday scheme. Have any of those had to be put on the back burner for now for future ones, or are we still hoping to move forward with any ones that you might have that we may not yet know about?
Well, in terms of fares innovation, that is an ongoing discussion that we're having with TfL to look at areas in which we can be innovative and adaptive to different travel patterns. That conversation is absolutely still going on, and nothing in the government settlement of 485 million, or indeed the discussions that we're having now about future funding, nothing in that would suggest that we would not have those discussions or develop ideas on how we might respond to different travel patterns.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. Just going back to the TfL reliance on fares income, and thinking about that, the expectation that tube and rail fares in London will rise. We've got a situation where fuel duty is frozen. Income from ULEZ is likely to reduce as people move to more compliant vehicles. So there's a risk that you have to take money from public transport fare payers in London to pay for fixing the roads. So I'm wondering, Andy, do you share the concerns of IPAG that the proposed major road network funding from the government has onerous conditions and a high cost risk to TfL? And do you expect a future settlement with government to start providing the revenue you need to maintain our roads, or are you going to need to start raising that revenue in London?
So thank you for the question. I think there's two elements to that. I mean, we carry the cost risk on any road schemes above any funding that we do receive. We are in active discussion with the Department for Transport around MRN funding. It is, in my view, and I think our collective view, but the others will say if they disagree, a very bureaucratic and slow process. We are hoping to start work on Gallows Corner towards the end of this financial year, March, April time, but we're still waiting for the final business case to be signed off for the MRN funding for that scheme. We've got very active work ongoing, again, to put the business case in for Brent Cross, to another critical road on the TLRN that has a variety of operating restrictions and is decaying. And therefore we need the funds to renew that road scheme. So we are in active discussion with the DfT around how can we improve the MRN process, how can we get some certainty with regard to funding. That's part of our CSR request in the order of about £150 million a year going forward, so that we can get on and fix the number of roads and infrastructure assets that we need. And at the same time, we are waiting for the outcome in January, hopefully, for the DfT to advise what funding London will receive as part of the budget commitment around road funding that then will enable us to support boroughs on some of their road repairs that are required as well. So the MRN scheme at the moment, and I'm not saying anything I haven't said to government, isn't really fit for purpose for London, in my view, and it needs significantly reshaping. And we hope as part of the CSR we will secure some funding specifically for roads in that.
Thank you.
So speaking of incentives, I have a couple more people to come in on this section, and if there's an incentive to move slightly quicker, I'll be taking a short comfort break at the end of this section. So I have Assembly Member Georgiou.
Seb, I'm so disappointed in you that you didn't use a Christmas analogy on this 4.6%. If you're nice and raise it, then Father Christmas, brings you presents. If you're naughty and don't raise it, there'll be a lump of coal in your stockings. But that's why I didn't do it. Oh no, next time, Patrick. If you want to use Christmas analogies, please go for it. In response to some of Assembly Member Hall's questions, you were talking about obviously hybrid working impacting on footfall. So the government's employment rights bill paper, whatever stage that we're at, will essentially put the onus on the employer to argue why someone wouldn't need to work from home if they wish to. Therefore, there will be possibly fewer people and less footfall on the TfL network, as people won't be mandated to go into the office. Have you guys looked into this at all? Is it on your radar? Is it something you could look into in the future, and how that could impact fares?
So it is something that we're aware of. I don't think we yet have a view on how that might impact office attendance, or therefore our commuting demand. I think there remains a really compelling case for people coming into one of the greatest cities in the world to do business, which will continue to be a draw factor that both employees and employers will continue to drive people to come into the office to collaborate and innovate and get the benefits of working in London.
Yeah, I get that. London's the greatest city in the world. We all believe that, and your job is to get as many people onto your network as possible. That's your job. But I think what would be very helpful for the Assembly is that when the impacts of that do become clear and possibly materialise, we're not just waiting for some modelling. Going back to modelling, Assembly Member Roberts loves it. If we can come back to some modelling, or you send it based on the Employment Right Bill, that would be very helpful. Is that okay? Nods? Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Yeah.
Yes, we can do that.
Yeah, thank you. Seb, it's just come through while this meeting's been going on that Lutfur Rahman's won his legal challenge on the removal of the LTNs. I remember previously there was a bit of back and forth, and I'm hoping you can all be able to put some cold water on it, that where LTNs were TfL funded and a local authority sought to remove them, number one, there would be financial penalties. Number two, there could be possible withdrawal of TfL funding. Obviously, this impacts in the budget moving forward, as we have possibly local authorities looking to do that. Has there been any work done on how much this could cost boroughs, or how much money you could claw back?
I'm sure there will be a fee. I don't have it, I'm afraid, but the provision of TfL funding for LTNs, obviously, if it's not being used for LTNs, then yes, you would there would be a requirement that money not be spent to the local authority. But I'll have to confirm on figures.
Okay, we are still in the section on TfL fares. Assemblymember Harani.
Only because the issue of advertising came up. I recently put in a written MQ on footways and crossings and advertising space there, and there's only 10 footways and bridges across London where that's the case. So a simple plea really because I think it's a real area where TfL could benefit from more advertising, especially on, I think, my constituency and the North Circular Road that runs through all of London with the South Circular. There's huge potential for footways and crossings, bridges that go over the North Circular in particular. That's just one red route. So if that could also be looked at in terms of other potential sources of funding, I'd be grateful.
I'll take that away.
Okay, Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you. So just going to be asking in relation to the growth that we've seen versus the predicted growth across the network. And what's very clear is actually the Elizabeth line has surpassed expectations. You expected an 8% growth. It's over 12%, which is fantastic. On the buses, we've seen a slight increase, which I think is sort of nudged up by the introduction of the Superloop, which has seen expectations again in terms of ridership surpassed expectations. On the London Underground, hovering around 3%, and rail services reduction across London. What the conclusion that I draw from that is actually where we've got new services, where we've got improved reliability, where we've got increased capacity, that increases ridership. How are we looking to do that with the commitments that we've already got and the medium-term strategy that we're trying to achieve with the government going forward?
You're absolutely right. I mean, the Elizabeth line continues to be a phenomenal success. Over 30% of journeys taken on it are new passenger journeys. That has also contributed to a little bit of bus ridership improvement, particularly in central London, around Tottenham Court Road and Bond Street. And it just goes to show when you connect new communities with new infrastructure, the benefits that it will deliver. That is a key element of what we also saw on the Northern Line extension to Battersea and the Barking Riverside extension on the overground, and are key parts of the growth projects that we're looking at around DLR to Thamesmead, Bakerloo Line extension, West London Orbital. But linked to that, we've got the immediate benefits that will come from the new rolling stock on the DLR and the Piccadilly line. Both those fleets are walk-through trains with air conditioning, with live customer information. Both fleets in themselves will deliver between 10 and 12% capacity improvement compared to the existing fleet, whilst also being a much better environment and better experience for the customers. And both fleets will also enable us to increase the timetable offering, both on the DLR and the PIC line. So the PIC line will go from 24 to 27 trains an hour, for example. And if we can get funding in the long term for new signalling, you have the capability to go up to over 30 trains an hour through central London. So they're the big focus. Clearly on buses, big focus on what we can do to improve bus journey times. The rollout, we focus a lot on zero-emission buses. Seb's already touched on 1,700. We'll have 1,900 by April. We'll have over 2,000 by the end of 2025. Those buses are not only zero-emission, they're also built to the latest safety standards, which are world-leading, and they have live customer information, and they have charging points, and therefore it's a much better experience for customers as well. So there's a number of improvements that we're making on those existing lines. And lastly, with the 4LM programme, the improved signalling there enables us, we'll be introducing, there's a new timetable coming in on part of the district line in the early 2025 that will reduce journey times as well. So speeding up people's journeys to enable them to have a shorter journey also makes a big difference.
I will talk about the capital investments a little bit later on this morning, but just in terms of, obviously from a revenue point of view, Rachel, Patrick, those investments have a return in terms of increased ridership. How much of that is already built into the figures, and how much would be impacted if we didn't get the funding that we're expecting for those for the rollout of additional trains, the signalling improvements and so on that Andy's just talked about?
Yes, they do have a positive financial effect, and of course, beyond that, they unlock very large amounts of social benefits, support housing, and so on. The additional point to note is they also contribute to savings, because more modern rolling stock is cheaper to maintain than the ageing assets that it replaces. So it actually has quite a large range of financial effects. In principle, where a capital investment is funded, then the consequential impacts on revenue and costs would be included in our budget. But the opposite is also true. If we're awaiting confirmation of full funding for a new project, then we would not make those assumptions.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Just a very quick question from me. On the Elizabeth line, it seems to have consistently surprised on the upside in terms of passenger numbers. I wasn't around when it was first planned. Do we know what the passenger numbers, the actual passenger numbers we're seeing, how they compare with the original business case? Only because I'm just thinking we constantly run into this problem of putting together a business case for government for capital funding. And if the actual outturn has surprised significantly on the upside, that might mean that, Crossrail 2, Thameslink 2, etc., maybe they're more viable than you might assume.
So we absolutely do. I don't think we have them to hand, but we can absolutely do that. And we've also just published the first, most recent benefits analysis of the Elizabeth line as well. So if the committee hasn't seen that, we can share that as well.
Thank you very much. Was there one further question?
Yeah.
Super fast question from Assemblymember Georgiou, and then we'll have a short break.
Seb, just to draw a line under the whole semantics argument, was the increase in the 4.6% asked by the government fair with regard to the amount that you'd be getting for capital funding?
Sorry, using what metric are do I consider it to be a fair?
What's
fair
your
request?
personal opinion?
Well, my personal opinion is that, as I said, there's a balance of costs and risks that TfL have been facing, and that in order to meet that, it's necessary sometimes to obviously increase fares. That's one of the levers that government has when it comes to setting national rail figures, and I don't think it's unreasonable for the government, if they're increasing national rail fares, to look at the money that they're providing to transport authorities and to make a request that the transport authorities do the same. I think that's fair and reasonable. I think it's also obviously therefore important that when mayors are doing that, that they look at the differential impact on different modes of transport, and that's why the mayor took the decision to freeze bus and tram fares, because, as I said before, they are disproportionately used by people on lower incomes, and therefore to try and protect that group as much as possible in the context of an overall increase, I think it's a fair decision.
Right. You've said it fair. So final question then. Have you or the mayor ever hinted, suggested or stated categorically that, if you can recall, that a previous government asking you to increase fares whilst also providing a similar offer for a capital grant was unfair?
So I think the only comparison that I can make is obviously the previous government and the previous capital settlement, which was half of, or slightly less than half than what we were given by the current government. It also came with a whole range of other contingencies attached to it. And it was, in my recollection, far more than an expectation that there would be consequences. It was a requirement that in order to have that money, we implement a number of changes, including, by the way, a change to the over 60 pass.
Thank you, Chair. OK, I don't see any other indications, and I'm staring at my piece of paper to make sure that I don't. So on that basis, that brings us to the end of our TfL Fares section. So we're now going to take a short adjournment of 5 minutes through until 11:49, when we will return with some questions on new TfL services. Thanks, everyone. Morning's Budget and Performance Committee with Transport for London. We now move on to our next section, which is TfL's new exciting services, with Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, you just slightly did, but that's all fine and dandy. So, yes, first question on Silvertown Tunnel for... I think I'll let you choose, Seb or Andy. How did you set the charge level for the Silvertown and Blackwall tunnels?
So thank you for the question. So as I'm sure the Assembly members know, we did a very extensive consultation exercise during the summer, which was based on, from memory, and Patrick and Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, some provisional suggested charges from a number of years ago. That consultation ran one of the largest that we have run over recent years. And as a result of the feedback, we then made some further amendments, as well as introducing what we call the Green and Fair package for particularly local residents. And those charges were then agreed by and confirmed by the TfL board earlier this month. I don't know, Rachel, Patrick, is there anything further you'd like to add?
Well, only that the development consent order that gave the powers for the tunnel set out a number of scheme objectives, and the user charges had to be set to meet those objectives. And that was the analysis that informed the reference case that Andy mentioned that was then consulted on and refined.
Okay, and those were the objectives around reducing congestion and therefore the charges to minimise the number of trips going through the tunnels.
That was one. There were 7 project objectives, but yes, improving the resilience of the crossing, improving the road network performance, supporting economic and population growth, minimising the adverse impact, achieving value for money, and the air quality, as you mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I want to pick up on the Green and Fair package. That included making the bike bus free for a year and providing free cross-river DLR travel. So, first of all, in terms of the bike bus, which in my consultation response I said it should be free for rather longer than a year, because actually if people, if you want people to not use cars going through that tunnel, getting them through with their bikes so they can conveniently make journeys by bike on both sides of the river is a real help. But you haven't yet started to communicate about the bike bus, and I haven't seen any sign of a bus stop near City Hall for the cycle bus. So what's the plan on this?
So, firstly, all the charges, including those which are free, will be reviewed in about a year. So what we're saying is they'll be free for at least a year. In terms of the cycle bus, this is brand new innovation for London. We have a physical design of the contract's been awarded to an operator. The design of the bus internally, which, as you imagine, is quite complex, has now been confirmed. The buses are being, or in the process of being, modified, so they'll be ready to start the service when the tunnel opens. And put my teeth in. The remaining infrastructure for the bus stops, both north and south of the river, is in the process of being installed as we speak. So that's one of the last elements of what's the last bit of construction actually that still needs to be complete, because the tunnel itself is virtually complete. So all of that infrastructure is being put in place, so it'll be ready for the spring opening. And it'll be a dedicated buses that will have specific livery. They'll be very obvious that they're the cycle shuttle buses.
Mm-hmm. And you've got enough of them to be able to cope with morning peaks and evening peaks?
Based on the demand that we're forecasting, yes, but we'll keep that under review. And if we are oversubscribed, then clearly we'll keep that under review and see if we need to either increase frequency or obtain more buses, if that requires it.
I mean, if there's a limit to provision, then you may not get people actually standing by a bus stop waiting, knowing they're going to be waiting for several buses to come through. So you'll measure that demand in a
Absolutely.
intelligent
so
way?
The bus, off the top of my head, is going to be operating every 8 to 10 minutes or so. If we are oversubscribed, I mean, that will be great news. We will clearly keep it under review. The bus will clearly have a capacity limit. And if we are exceeding that and we are having people waiting for too long a period of time, then clearly we'll keep the service under review to see what we can do to increase it.
Okay, because obviously every person going through on a bike is one less car and a bit less traffic congestion. The other issue is the this free DLR travel across the river. Now, there have been huge issues at the Cutty Sark DLR station with the escalators being out of service. Is there money in the budget for fixing those Cutty Sark station escalators? And might you think about extending the Green and Fair package for a bit longer with that free DLR crossing, particularly if you've got the problem with those station escalators not working?
So again, the free travel will be kept under review. It's for at least a year. In terms of Cutty Sark, I'd like to put on record my apologies to customers who've suffered the inconvenience of those escalators being out of service. There were repairs done to them earlier in the year, but subsequently the escalators have failed again. They need either replacement or a full overhaul. We have done some reprioritisation. Our engineering teams are working through with our suppliers around the scale of the works that are required and how long that will take. And we hope to be able to give some clarity to Cutty Sark users early in the new year. But we do have the money available in the budget going forward to either replace or do a significant refurbishment so that we will get the escalators in Cutty Sark working. But it will take some time because of their age and the condition that they're in.
Thank you, and I think there'll be a lot of people that use that station who will be very grateful to hear that. Patrick, we've heard that we kind of have an idea of the Silvertown Tunnel opening in the spring, but when precisely does the budget allow the opening of the Silvertown Tunnel?
So the budget makes no specific date. We've modelled it based on a range of dates within the spring.
Okay, thank you. That's not much clearer. And then the level of income assumed in 2025-26, what is that? And what is TfL required to pay for the operation of the tunnel?
So the level of revenue assumed for 25-26 from the charging both Silvertown and Blackwall tunnels, as they're both part of the scheme, is 103 million, 103.8 million. And in the first year, the operating costs are assumed at 106.7 million. So in the first year, there will be a small deficit. We then project the scheme to move into a small surplus of around £3 million per annum from 26-27 onwards.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks. Everyone's very excited to ask lots of questions, which is great, but I would just gesture vaguely towards the clock. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. How many years of charging do you expect it to take until the cost of the building of the Silvertown Tunnel is covered?
Yes, so within the operating expenditure, there is the repayment of the capital assumptions. And I think from memory, but we'll confirm definitely in writing that it's a 25-year repayment.
Thank you. And is there a contractual reason why a lower charge level would not have been possible?
As I mentioned to Assembly Member Russell, the charges were set based on the development consent order. So that's the legal powers for the scheme that were legally binding that we had to make sure we met those objectives. So we had to be able to demonstrate through our modelling that the package of charges that we set balanced those 7 different project objectives in terms of ensuring there's no detriment to health, safety and the environment, but also ensuring value for money and affordability. So that was the constraints that the proposed case that were set under.
And just to add to that, just to be clear, the contractor payments are not varied by volume, they're varied by availability. So there's not a contractual connection there.
Yeah, thank you. The reason I ask the question, because, you know, if we're using the colloquial term white van man, you know, someone that possibly has a non-ULEZ compliant car and is using the Blackwall Tunnel or Silvertown, you know, twice a day, one in, one out. You know, they're looking at what, if we're looking at working days across the year, about £5,000 a year added just to be able to trade, work or visit whoever they want to visit. What modelling has been done on bad debt provision on this? I know we're anticipating a reduction this coming financial year, but with the introduction of the tolls, are we expecting any major shift?
So I'll let Rachel just answer on the bad debt side in a moment, but I think it's worth being really clear that the tunnel will significantly reduce journey times for people trying to get across the river, and that will have a significant benefit to small, medium enterprises, single employers, that side of it as well. So there's been a huge amount of modelling done around traffic volumes and, as part of the consultation, the impact to individuals, which is why we've also got the various discounts and the Green and Fair package as well. But Rachel, do you want to touch on bad debt?
Yeah, only to say that in the run-up to opening, obviously there'll be an extensive communications package that will really underline the benefits for users of registering for auto-pay, and therefore making sure that the costs that they do incur are as low as possible. In setting the budget, we have made an allowance for what we expect needs to be a bad debt provision around the tunnel user charging. But as you will have seen, overall, we expect our bad debt provision to be falling next year.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think my concern is, you know, getting somewhere quicker doesn't matter if you've bankrupted someone. But thank you, Chair.
Okay, Assembly Member Hall.
Really quick, this bike bus, is it going to allow electric bikes on it?
Yes.
Because you know what the fire brigades say about the batteries on so many of these bikes and scooters. Are scooters considered the same sort of thing?
So electric scooters are illegal anyway.
I know,
unless
they're still seen on your network.
Well, they're not allowed on the network. So our staff and officers and the police do their best to manage that and enforce it. We're working very closely with the fire brigade around the impact of e-bikes. There's been a lot of publicity on that. Obviously, modified e-bikes are higher risk, and also when they're on charge, there clearly won't be any bikes charging on the bus, and it is a very short journey, and the bus will be there'll be very clear procedures how to react in the event of there being any safety incident on board the bus, as there is with any bus today. So yeah, I don't anticipate any restrictions at this time, but we'll keep it under review, and we're working closely with the fire brigade.
Yeah, because the problem is, I mean, if you've got one electric bike on a bus, that's one thing. If you have a bike bus, it's going to be full of them, and you only need one that's dodgy, and the last thing you want is something to happen underground. That would really be calamitous, I would have thought.
Yeah, but we have a full safety risk assessment and very clear procedures on what the bus driver would do in the event of there being any incident on board the bus. A bus going through Silvertown Tunnel is very different to, for example, an e-bike on a tube train in a deep tube tunnel with no means of escape without going through the end of the carriage. So, you know, we will assess this all with the fire brigade, and if there are any restrictions, they'll be communicated in advance. But at the moment, I don't anticipate there being any.
Okay, I'll come back to it another time. Thank you.
Okay, not to prolong, but actually, am I right in thinking that on the deep tube network, you can take like a folding e-bike, but not a scooter? Is that right?
Well, at the moment, you can't take any full-size bikes. At the minute, you can take folding bikes in certain hours of the day. You're not allowed in the peak in the same way as any bikes.
But a folding e-bike, though, you could take on a...
Yeah, you can at the moment, yes.
Okay, so I was just trying to say that... Okay. I said not to prolong it, so I won't prolong it. Assemblymember Ahmad.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. We've talked about the two tunnels, Silvertown and Blackwall Tunnel, and charging. The third tunnel, which sometimes is forgotten, I think, is the Rotherhithe Tunnel, which is in my constituency of Southwark. And as you will be very aware, there have been real concerns about charging for both the Blackwall Tunnel and Silvertown Tunnel, meaning that people would divert to use the Rotherhithe Tunnel, which there are no plans at the moment to charge for. Could you update us on what is happening with Rotherhithe at the moment, and you know what changes we could expect to see in future?
So we've got no plans to introduce any form of charging for Rotherhithe. The big question we have around Rotherhithe is how we obtain sufficient capital funding to do the necessary works that are required to upgrade the tunnel, particularly around its ventilation systems and fire protection systems. It's under numerous restrictions at the moment, as you know, to safeguard the operation of the tunnel, and we urgently need to upgrade the tunnel, and that's one of the key elements in our plans going forward. As you know, because of the state of the equipment in there, is subject to quite often short notice closures when we have any form of equipment failure. We spend a lot of resource and time making sure we reduce the impact of those disruptions. But you know, we are as confident as we can be based on the traffic modelling that we don't expect to see a significant increase in traffic using Rotherhithe, and because of the nature of restrictions in terms of size of vehicle, there's a limit to that anyway. So our focus is how we can get the funds to upgrade the tunnel and get it into a better state of condition.
Thank you. And how are we going to get the funds?
It's part of our capital funding long-term CSR requirement.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Assembly Member Harani.
Thank you, Chair. Just on new services, but moving to another service, Superloop 2. So first I'm going to ask a question to Seb. So can you outline what you feel the benefits will be of Superloop 2 and what we learned from Superloop 1?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chair, you're quite right. The idea of an express bus is not new, but the concept of linking outer London town centres, I would argue, is. But as you'll have heard from the Commissioner, the increase in ridership that we've seen on Superloop 1 has exceeded expectations. It's a very popular service that clearly delivers on a need that's probably been there for a while, but which the pandemic has accelerated in terms of obviousness. The Superloop 2 is really designed to complement and supplement the original Superloop by providing additional services that both provide new town centre to town centre routes, but also complement and link to the existing Superloop. And it's the process of consultation on where those routes will be will start shortly, and that will obviously be a similar process to Superloop 1, whereby the different communities will have ideas about where the gaps are in services, what the most useful links will be, and that process is obviously essential to ensure that we get as useful a service as possible when we come to introduce the new routes.
And will that be based on the routes that have already been published by
Yes.
the Mayor previously, the manifesto?
Yes.
Okay. And are you open to making any changes or extensions on the Superloop 1, if you like, routes?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the benefit, obviously, of the bus network is that it is relatively flexible. I say relatively because each change does need to be consulted on, does require an enormous amount of work by the teams, quality impact assessments, and so on. So relatively flexible, but it obviously can respond to changes in demand, to patterns of ridership that perhaps haven't matched expectations or have fallen short for whatever reason. That's clearly in everyone's interest that there is that level of flexibility.
Thank you. Patrick, so just looking at some of the modelling, do you expect to see more bus journeys taken as a result of Superloop services, whether that's 1 or 2? How does that match up with increasing capacity or new service or demand?
So in the budget, we model our demand at a network level. So we set out the changes that will be happening to each of our modes at a network level. So when it comes to buses, a number of the factors we're discussing in the first half of the session are impacting demand in terms of macroeconomic and population factors. Then we also include the impact of service improvements, of which Superloop 1 has been one. And in the coming budget year, there will be the final stage of the first element of Superloop, which is the Superloop service that will serve through Silvertown Tunnel. So that service improvement is included in the budget and the associated demand increases that arise from it. And from the benefits realisation work we have done on the initial phases of Superloop, they've shown a significant increase in demand, both at a route level, but also when you look at the overall corridors they serve, because some passengers are switching from one bus service to another. Even when you look at that broader view, it's providing a boost to demand. So we've used some of that insight from the first phase to factor into our modelling for the second phase of Superloop.
Okay, I mean that's positive to hear. Another thing I'm quite interested in is, like Assembly Member Roberts did say, that there has been express bus routes in London. Previously, I had the Heathrow to Harrow express route, where I represent, and I've been interested to see if the introduction of Superloop, where you're now introducing or you have introduced routes that connect on express bus routes to a, if you like, isolated express bus route, whether that's had an impact on more people using that route itself. So if you don't have the data, I'll be quite, I'd love to receive it.
We can provide that after the committee.
Thank you. So in terms of the Superloop 2, when does the budget, Patrick, assume that the second Superloop will be rolled out?
So this budget includes a provision to start mobilising that second phase of the Superloop, and has a £10 million allowance in 25-26 to get that work well underway. But as we said right at the start of the meeting, like many of our new initiatives that we are progressing, we do require that longer-term capital funding settlement to be able to move those projects into delivery. So at the moment, we haven't assumed a date for those services to go into service, and it will be connected to the longer-term funding discussions we have with government as part of the spending review.
So you've allocated funding to design stage, consultation, that phase, but not into actual delivery for 25-26?
Yes, and some of the supporting infrastructure, the enabling works to get the services ready. Yes.
Okay, what would the full year cost be if it was implemented?
I don't believe we've fully worked out the routes yet in terms of the level of design and maturity to produce a full cost estimate, but it will be higher than £10 million.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick request from me, a data question really. So when you've got Superloop up and running and Superloop 2 up and running, that's quite a large cluster of routes that are substantially different from all the other buses, not just in terms of their nature, but I mean, the other buses are seeing problems with speeds and problems with passenger numbers, whereas Superloop, obviously by definition, is supposed to be quicker and it's seeing passenger numbers rise. Have you given any thought to disaggregating the data? Because it seems to me smushing them both together kind of muddies the waters in terms of what they're each doing. And I know for me personally, it would be interesting to see the contrast between those two, because I suspect there will be some divergence.
Yeah, so I think we are really interested in understanding in greater depth all of our demand data. In doing that, though, we are conscious of it's really, really difficult to see each of the individual sets of choices that customers make when they make a journey, because our, what we call our TAPS data gives us a beginning and end, but there are multiple choices that customers can make. So it does tend to come with a fairly high caveat. With Superloop, because of the factors that you name, you know, it's new, it is showing different characteristics. We will certainly be doing studies to compare how it's outturning compared with what we thought when we wrote the business case. So we do keep it under review, but as I say, we just need to be careful that we don't read into those individual analyses more. But you're quite right, the characteristics here, and indeed the outcomes seem to be quite different. So we'll keep doing what we can to understand what the data
Well, I'm
is.
just thinking, so SL7, X26 as it was, that was a saloon every half an hour, then it became a double-decker every half an hour, now it's a double-decker every 15 minutes, and it's still pretty full. So it seems to be over a very long period, it must be 10 years or so that route's been going, the kind of prototype, if you like. Demand has just kept on rising. That's my perception locally.
Yes.
Anyway, as a quick request, I've made my request. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Andy, can I come to you? It's about the Rotherhithe Tunnel. So one side of the tunnel starts or exits in Limehouse, which is in my constituency. So the Standard yesterday reported that you are hoping for, well, keeping your fingers crossed for multi-year funding from Rachel Reeves next year. This would allow you to close the tunnel for long-term repairs at some stage from 2026 onwards. The same report then goes on to say that the Department for Transport said that the tunnel's maintenance is TfL's responsibility, and pointed out that they've just been allocated almost £500 million in the Treasury's recent budget. There seems to be some sort of contradiction here. How optimistic are you of getting the money?
In terms of how optimistic I am, I'm optimistic that we will get a long-term capital funding settlement.
I hope you do.
Because, hopefully we all do. Because the language we are hearing from officials across multiple government departments is all aligned and consistent around they recognise that TfL needs a long-term capital funding agreement, and equally a number of ministers have said the same, which is not what the previous government said. So I'm optimistic. The key question is quantum and duration. We have asked for 6 years, an average of £650 million a year for us to renew existing assets or replace existing assets on our transport network. And then an additional ask is for the new growth scheme, so DLR Thamesmead, Bakerloo Line extension, etc. Rotherhithe is in both our own capital commitments plus the CSR commitments. You know, it is in the order of £170 million required to upgrade and update and bring the Rotherhithe Tunnel to the sufficient standards that we need to cope with the levels of traffic and demand that it has. And it is part of the overall prioritisation that we have to do across the road network and the rail network. So I hope we will get the settlement we need, and then if we do, then that will enable us to firm up the plans for what we can do for Rotherhithe. At the same time, we have to continue to challenge ourselves on can we do it for less, can we do it in a more efficient manner, can we do it in a way that minimises the disruption whilst we do it. And we'd always said we would not actually be in a position to do anything for Rotherhithe, even if we had the money, until Silvertown was open, because we need to have that crossing to cope with if Rotherhithe is shut for a period of time for us to upgrade it.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed, Andy. I think I'll finish on this note, Chair, that the report also says yesterday, and I'm glad that TfL has assured drivers that the tunnel continues to operate safely under enhanced day-to-day maintenance. So thank you for the reassurance. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I think that's it for new services. We now move on to section on operating costs with Assembly Member Hall.
Yeah, just one very, very quick point. I was told by somebody that worked for TfL that the Rotherhithe is in a very, very serious condition. So if you don't get the money in place, is it likely that you'll close it anyway once Silvertown is open? I did ask the Mayor about this.
So it's absolutely not our intention to close it, but if the nature of the equipment and the condition of the tunnel is such that it is under a constant review, and as I already said, we have a number of short notice closures, because if particularly the ventilation equipment falls below the number that we need to maintain safe operations, we have to close the tunnel. If we get to the point where we have been unable to upgrade it and we can no longer get spares or guarantee the safe operation, then ultimately it could close. But that is not something that we are contemplating at the moment, and it's certainly not something that we're considering just because Silvertown has opened. Our focus is how we get the funds to upgrade and replace the equipment in the tunnel.
Okay, but you recognise the fact that it's in a very serious condition?
Absolutely, as have my predecessors.
Yeah, thank you. Right, going on to the operating costs. So, Patrick, your objective analysis presentation shows other operating costs falling from 1 billion in the 24-25 budget to 0.7 billion in the 25-20. I think that should be 25-26 budget. What costs are included in this category, and what is driving the decrease?
So there will be a range of costs that are included in that category, which I might be able to pull out whilst I'm speaking, otherwise we'll have to send it to you after the meeting. But the other element that drives the decrease is that although a reasonable proportion of the specific savings initiatives that we have identified have been allocated into individual cost lines and have clear owners and actions, there are some savings initiatives that are less mature, we are still working through, so have not yet been allocated to individual line items in the budget, and therefore at this stage in the draft budget sit against that other operating costs line, and as we move into the final budget we'll start to apportion those out to move into the year and deliver those savings.
Okay, well we can look forward to seeing that. How confident are you that this will be achieved?
So if I just build on what Patrick said, I outlined at the beginning the range of different focal points we've got around our savings, and one of the reasons why we take our time over allocating it to the specific budget line is so that we know we've got a definite delivery plan. Perhaps the most obvious example is, as I said, there is a really high volume of third-party contracts coming up for retender.
Yes.
I think it's 310, and that's just the contracts that are over £1 million. So if I added all of them together, we're talking billions of pounds of expenditure. But some of them will obviously be more suitable for saying, well, how could we have an improved operating model? How could we have lower the barriers to entry so we can get more suppliers? So it's as we do that work in the final stages of the budget. But that's one of our big areas of opportunity, if that's a helpful example.
It's opportunity. It also might present problems if you're renewing contracts.
So the budget sort of acknowledges the known pressures, so things like inflation is the most obvious one, and we build off our actuals. So if there has been, a reason why a particular contract has increased, we will have factored that in already. So really, we think we've taken adequate account of any risk element or downside pressure. So what we're looking at here is how do we bring to life the opportunity piece of it.
So you factored in the additional national insurance contributions from employers, etc.?
So if I just take the national insurance contribution in two parts, so to the extent that the higher national insurance contribution affects TfL directly, TfL is defined as a local authority which is expected to be compensated, although the precise mechanism, but to come to the supply chain.
Does the same apply then for people that contract into? No, I didn't think it did.
No, it doesn't. So, of course, what we get charged is a function of many things. How competitive the market is, how good the margins for that particular sector are, and their cost base, plus the target dividend for our suppliers. So we don't see, when they give new bids to us, how that particular item has affected their calculations. I wouldn't expect to see that. I would also comment that to the extent that it does feed through, it will emerge over time. So even though over the next 2 years there are a significant number of contracts, that is still a minority of the third-party contracts that we have that turn over on that over those next 2 years.
Okay, but it must be something in the back of your mind, because it will increase their costs, surely. It has to. Well, if they're heavily, if they've got lots of staff, it must increase their costs. So renewing contracts isn't necessarily going to give you cost benefits from that, because different suppliers, etc., are going to have higher costs as we go on.
Yeah, to pick up one of the points you make, for many of our suppliers, the majority of their costs are driven by materials, for example, rather than people costs. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why we felt the inflation pressure coming through, because that's been particularly acute in some materials categories. So we're conscious of it, but as I say, what happens to one of our partners' cost bases doesn't automatically feed through into prices.
I think, if I may as well just add, that the other benefit of having reached a capital settlement for next year earlier than we had has enabled us to go out to our supply chain earlier to give them assurance around the programme of work for next year. And if we too get the CSR agreed, which will obviously be hopefully in the first quarter of next financial year, any commitments after that will also enable us to potentially do multi-year contracts, which generally are lower cost overall. So there'll be a benefit going on ahead there too.
Okay, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Patrick, after adjusting to pay inflation, the level the level of TfL employee costs is expected to fall by 10%. How is this reduction being achieved?
So this is not due to any staff restructuring. So as we were preparing the budget, we were engaged in the triennial revaluation of the TfL pension fund. And that process has been continuing since the 31st of March, which is the valuation date. And we have been working with the trustees to conclude that process. So in preparing the budget, we had to make an assumption on the outcome of that valuation and the impact that will have on future employer contributions. But we have now concluded with the revaluation process to reach agreement with the trustees on the future TfL employer contributions for the next 3 years. So the result of that is, because the scheme has moved into a larger surplus overall, the surplus was 3.6 billion at the valuation date. That has allowed us to reduce our employer contribution rate to that pension fund from 27.3% previously to 10.5%. For at least the next 3 years covered by this triennial valuation. So that delivers a significant saving to TfL, and that's reflected into the staff cost line.
Okay, thank you. You did mention that in your opening, so I was wondering where it comes. It is significant, isn't it? Does that come off the back of all that work that was done around pensions a couple of years ago?
So you'll recall there was a condition in the funding settlement for us to review the pension scheme. That hasn't resulted in any changes to the pension scheme. This is all as a result of the surplus and other actions that the management have taken.
Well done on that action, because it's quite significant. Rachel, what are the key risks to achieving your target level of savings?
I think I have covered some of this
Is there anything else you want to add?
I think really the focus has to be on looking into the longer term. So, as Andy said, you know, for many years now and very successfully, we have implemented savings programs, but clearly the longer you go on, the more you have to fight for additional opportunities. What's happening, though, in parallel is our colleagues are becoming better and better at looking for those opportunities. So that's what gives me confidence. The risk will be, I mean, you've already mentioned one actually, new cost pressures emerging through the supply chain. But the biggest thing that gives me confidence is our performance, our historic and current performance in terms of securing savings continues to be strong.
Good. Would that had been done many, many years ago, but I'm glad it's being done now. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Assemblymember Harani.
Thank you, Chair. Just moving to the issue of bad debt. So I'm going to turn to Patrick with, oh, it's you, Rachel. Okay, I'm going to turn to you with these questions then. So generally there's been an upward trend, and looking at the breakdown in data, it's largely an increase in ULEZ-related bad debt. But next year, so 25-26, there's a significant decrease shown in the budget that's been presented. What's the reason for that?
Thank you. So this has been a significant area of focus for us in the current year. As you'll have noted, we are forecasting to have a higher level of bad debt expense than we budgeted in the current year. So it has, and I'll run through in a moment what we're doing about it, but I think there are two things happening. The first one is the actual volumes flowing through the scheme. So clearly compliance is already high. We're expecting it to increase. Currently only a very small proportion, even now, 0.27% of people get a PCN at all. But we are expecting compliance to continue to rise. And obviously, as volumes get lower of non-compliance, then the proportion of that becomes a bad debt gets lower, if that makes sense. So it's the nature of this scheme, which is designed around policy outcomes, to be delivering that rising compliance, and as a consequence, a lower level of bad debt. I should, though, say that just because we create an accounting provision, which is what you see in the tables, that does not mean we are not collecting it. And we've done a lot of work this year to understand the causes of why the bad debt has risen. There's no single dominant factor. We are aware, of course, it's quite a small proportion, but if people have financial difficulties, they have health or medical issues that give them a problem with paying, we have a lot of policies in place to support people, and our position with that is always do get in touch with us, because we will do whatever we can. But unfortunately, there is also a proportion of users where the issue is refusal to pay. And what our focus has been, in addition to supporting any vulnerable customers, is really targeting that sort of persistent evader issue. We've put a real significant boost. We've tripled the number of people in the investigations team, and we're seeing the number of cases that they're being able to progress really accelerate even more quickly than we're adding resource. We have previously said that we've seized 1,400 vehicles. In fact, that was the 12 months up to July. It's now over 1,900. And we're increasingly recouping some of the debt owed by the sale of vehicles belonging to non-payers. We've also this year focused harder on other options open to us to recover debt. So I think I've said when we've discussed this previously, it's a very extensive process to go through the issue of the appeal, the rights of, the issue of the PCN, the rights of people to appeal both firstly through representations to TfL and then through an independent process. Then it proceeds to the Traffic Enforcement Centre and so on. But ultimately, at the end of that, our enforcement agents only have the right to seize the vehicle. So what we've looked at this year is other courts, county courts and high court enforcement action, and we're progressing a wave of cases now. And what we're seeking there, in addition to the vehicle, is the potential application of attachment of earnings, orders, CCJs, etc. So as I say, I really want to be very firm that just because we create an accounting provision does not mean that we will not continue to press for collection of these debts.
And do you ever settle out of court?
Yes, I mean, we would be open to phased payments if people owe money. We really do try, and we're working closely with our enforcement agents to get this balance right. We've looked, for example, at the documentation that we send people and making sure that that's plain English, that it nudges people before their costs increase again. But yes, absolutely, we're open-minded to a conversation with people about a phased recovery and so on.
Okay, and what about fare evasion? Because that is something that people quite regularly write to me about. It is annoying for passengers who obviously pay in the way they should to see people constantly going through the barriers and not paying.
Yes, so fare evasion also is a real area of focus for us. I should say that in addition to the financial implications, it's often the cause of issues for our colleagues on the front line who are having to handle the consequences. So it's a potential risk for workplace violence as well. So there's more than the financial reason for us to focus on that. We're making a lot of improvements, and perhaps we could write to you with the statistics to back this up, but we're looking at all of the behavioural things. We are doing very well with improving our data around this, again, looking at trends so that we can target enforcement agents, and then we're looking particularly at how the gates operate so that to see whether we can tighten up there. So again, yes, a real focus for us. Sorry, just finally, every single penny that we can get back in is a penny we can reinvest in.
No, I'm glad you mentioned the gates, because I think, have you been looking at other countries to see what technologies they're using to stop this? Because, yeah, I imagine there's probably potential there.
I mean, absolutely. We talk all of the time with partner organisations to see what we can learn. I do think actually London is seen as not having a particularly bad problem in a global context, but nevertheless, the more learning we can do, the better.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. I would appreciate you writing to us with that data. And also, apologies for my geek hat on very briefly, I'm also interested in the methodology by which you deduce that there's been fare evasion. So if somebody walks across the road there, gets on Royal Victoria, there's no barrier or anything, gets on that train, rides a few stops, gets off at another stop where there's no barrier on the DLR, how would you even know that they have? I'm not asking you to answer that now, but that kind of methodological question, just because we're very short on time, but I'm interested to know how you know the thing that you don't, because obviously if they tap in, you measure it. So you're talking about people who are by definition not measured.
Yes.
And how do you measure that?
So it's a really good question, and perhaps when we write to you, we'll add some more detail. But predominantly what we have is the data from when tickets are checked.
Okay. So it's a sort of dip sampling, spot check type methodology. Got you. Okay. Oops. So we now move on to our final couple of sections, which are to do with capital and renewals, starting with Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. So first question is, what level of capital renewal expenditure do you feel is required annually to maintain the TfL network in the current state of repair?
So if I just give a brief overview and then ask Rachel or Patrick to come in. I mean, we are significantly increasing the amount of capital we're spending on our renewals. This year is an increase on last year. Next year, in the provisional budget, or the draft budget, we're assuming another 300 million increase. And this is because we are trying to catch up on the amount of assets that should have been renewed or replaced over the past few years. We'll clarify what that final number is, obviously, in the final budget come March. But ideally, we'd like to be spending more going forward. But equally, we want to get that long-term capital funding settlement agreed. So then that gives us certainty to the supply chain, because the other element to this is how we ensure we get more value out of every pound that we spend on the network. So, and there's a real focus here across both the rail network and the road network, which is where we also need the MRN that we touched on earlier to deliver for us. Rachel.
So not much to add other than, we would like to be able to spend significantly more on renewals, not just to get the assets into a state of good repair, again, because we think that supports attracting and growing customer numbers and giving people a good experience. But just to build on the point that Andy made, I do think this greater certainty over our investment programme is really crucial, because I don't think there are many people who say we won't make a more efficient and effective investment plan if we can see out over several years. We will get better deployment of resources, better planning of access, because remember, we also got to manage not closing our assets and our services for customers, and we will get better prices from our suppliers. So the scope, it's really important that we continue to build this investment, but I think we can get more from the money we're spending in that multi-year context.
Thank you, and I'll come back to those points in a moment, but I think that the ask at the moment is just over £1.1 billion towards renewals. As you say, Andy, that's gone up significantly, about 40% from last year. How much of that is down to trying to catch up with the backlog that you talked about earlier through the asks that you had from central government in previous years that you didn't receive effectively, and when do you feel like you're going to be on top of working through that backlog?
So I don't have the number to hand in terms of how much the backlog is, but within that, for example, it includes overhaul of a number of tube fleets. It includes the Central Line Improvement Programme, which will deliver a significantly improved reliability and the heavy overhaul of the Central Line trains. It also includes a number of rail system enhancements and signalling changes on the Central Line as well. All of those were programmed to be delivered a number of years earlier. So we can write to the committee afterwards to give a clearer view on that. My own view is it's going to take a number of years for us to get back to catch up fully with where we'd ideally like to be, but that's also why it's so important that we get the funding for the new rolling stock and the new upgrades. You know, as Rachel or Patrick, I remember who mentioned earlier, you know, upgrading the new rolling stock on the Piccadilly line will improve our efficiency and our cost of maintenance. You know, the Piccadilly line fleet came into service in 1973. Part of the reason we're having the disruption on the Uxbridge branch at the minute is because the trains are so old now, and the wheels have been repaired so often because of track conditions that we've got a number of those trains out damaged. The new fleet will prevent that in the same way the S stock on the Metropolitan line can keep running even though the Piccadilly line can't. So it reduces our cost of maintenance. Completing full lines modernisation will reduce our cost of maintenance and reduce the number of signal failures we see, particularly on the north end of the Metropolitan line. So it's not only catching up, it's also about reducing our operational disruption and maintenance costs going forward as well.
Just on that point, actually, back in October at the TfL Programmes and Investments Committee, you talked about the service impact of not having renewed those services, the Piccadilly line. I've got that running through my constituency, both arms of that, and of course, particularly challenging for, you know, if I can put it mildly, for those users on the Uxbridge arm at the moment who are having to deal with leaves impacting on their ability to be able to get to work and back. What would you say to those passengers, first of all, but how is that going to, how will this impact on service delivery going forward? And could I extract from what you said there, Andy, that when we do get the new Piccadilly line trains, you're going to prioritise that on the Uxbridge arm to start off with? And I've got to declare a personal interest, I'm on the other arm, actually. But
so, as I think I said before, I'm happy to say again, you know, I really like to apologise for customers who are being inconvenienced by the prolonged suspension of the Piccadilly line. All the stations are still served, but obviously customers having to change at Rayners Lane. That is going to continue for a number of weeks yet because of the number of trains that have been damaged. We do have a very comprehensive leaf full plan, the same way National Rail do. It's been very successful over the last few years, but the two big storms, Burton and Darragh, have really caused huge impact to the Piccadilly line fleet, which, because it's over 50 years old, has just not been able to cope with the track conditions. As I mentioned, the Metropolitan line trains do and can cope, and the new Piccadilly line trains will cope with them as well. They're not due to come into service till the end of next year, so unfortunately I think we're going to have one more season at least where there's some risk to the branch, but we are looking at how we deploy the trains going forward. They will be deployed in phases, and from memory, but we can confirm, is I think they will be deployed from the west first, but I'll confirm that in writing. But we're still in the early days of testing of the first train in the depot at the moment. But yeah, I'd just like to reiterate again and apologise to customers who've been inconvenienced by the ongoing suspension for the Uxbridge branch. Yeah, it was despite the best efforts of the team to try and mitigate that, but we've had a really challenging winter and the trains have been damaged. We've got a large number of them out of service and the teams are working really hard to get those back in service. But yeah, there's likely to be disruption for some weeks to come yet.
Thank you, Andy. So in terms of just going back to the point you made earlier about how important that multi-year settlement is, and you've not had that obviously for a long time, the impact and ability for you to deliver what you talked about earlier, so value for money, and making sure that we've got the significant capacity, and that we deliver that to, you know, when you're spending such significant amounts of money, making sure that we're still getting that, you know, the best return on that investment. How do we do that?
Well, it's absolutely critical. You know, if we'd had a long-term capital funding agreement, I am absolutely convinced we would not have seen the issues we had on the Central line, for example, with the motor failures and the wheels, because those trains would have been upgraded to the new improved version a number of years ago. As a result, that means we've had to spend emergency money in effect to do the repairs and continue to overhaul components that we were assuming would have been out of service. So that's not an efficient use of money. It's not value for money. And that's why we need to get into a steady state of capital funding, both in terms of why it's so important for us to deliver our operating surplus, so that we can fund, as we are doing already, about 75% to 80% of our own capital programme. I'm not aware of any other public transport authority that does that, but then also have that certainty around major rolling stock replacement, major road renewal funding, major signalling upgrades, all of which will deliver much better value for money, much more reliable services. We still deliver a reliable and safe service, but we're not quite meeting the really high standards for all of our customers that we aspire to, and that is our real priority going forward. So maintaining a safe and reliable, consistent service for the whole of London is absolutely critical. And if we can get that funding agreement with the certainty for the next 6 years, that will give us a real consistency and clarity, and at the same time also play to the government's agenda and the Mayor's agenda around increasing jobs, delivering economic growth, not just for London, but also for a huge number of organisations outside of London. TfL contributes directly to over 100,000 jobs outside of London and the South East, and with that certainty, our supply chain can invest in skills, apprentices, graduates, and the same we can as well, which is all good for the wider economy.
What was really clear from your answer there, Andy, was that there's been a cost of not having that long-term investment, not only, of course, to TfL, but clearly to customers as well, both on the Central Line and the Piccadilly Line. Have you got those costs with you today, or could you share those with the committee in terms of how much you've had to invest as emergency investments to just, those sort of sticking plasters on the network to keep it going?
We can write to the committee afterwards and say what the estimated costs are and the actual costs are, what we've had to spend, particularly on the Central Line, for example, and we can give a view on some of the other significant infrastructure failures that have occurred that otherwise wouldn't have done.
And do you factor into that the number of refunds that you would have to allocate because of additional delays, because they wouldn't have occurred otherwise?
Yes.
Excellent. And then just finally, can you provide some detail about how the level of capital renewals figure that we've talked about today has been arrived at?
Yeah, we can provide that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Assembly Member Ahmad.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for you, Deputy Mayor. What is the current state of capital funding negotiations with government at the moment?
Obviously building on the success of the discussions that we've had for the forthcoming financial year, the discussions have now begun with government on the longer term settlement. TfL have submitted to DfT the requests that they have for the comprehensive spending review, and obviously when the comprehensive spending review takes place, we will have already by then have had a number of conversations with government. So the short answer is they've already begun, and it's impossible obviously to determine the outcome, but the tone of those conversations has been very positive, and the certain level of helpfulness from ministers and officials has been high.
Good to hear. Just in terms of capital funding, if I could ask you a question, Commissioner. So we've talked a lot about Piccadilly trains and the upgrade to the trains themselves. Could you just take this opportunity to tell us where we are with the Northern Line trains, particularly as I have an issue around, well, we all have issues around tube noise, and I know all about grinding, etc., but on the Kennington Loop, there is a problem which I have written to you about, and one of the issues that we've been told that might resolve this is the new Northern Line trains. So could you tell us where we are with that, please?
I'm not aware of any new Northern Line trains. We have no plans to replace the Northern Line trains at the minute. The rolling stock that we have in our plans to replace the Piccadilly, then the Bakerloo, then the Central Line. We are working with Alstom, who are the maintenance provider of the Northern Line trains, to improve their reliability. We had some issues earlier in the year. They've now been overcome. And then we have the wider noise across the network, where we're doing comprehensive work around grinding and rail replacement. So there are no plans at the moment to replace the Northern Line trains. I think they're currently scheduled to be in service to at least 2040 off the top of my head, but we can confirm that in writing.
That would be really helpful, thank you. And moving back to you, Deputy Mayor, the whole issue of the Bakerloo extension obviously has been in the news quite a lot over the last few months. Do you want to take this opportunity just to update us, hopefully give us a bit of good news, because for my constituents it would be a life and game changer, just like the extension of the Northern Line to Nine Elms was. You know, an extension on the Bakerloo line would be a massive improvement to transport facilities.
Absolutely, it would, and rest assured that I and the Mayor are very supportive of the Bakerloo line extension. I believe there's been a proposal one way or another to extend the Bakerloo line since the 1930s, so the need for the line to be extended into South East London has been recognised for a very long time. But obviously, we now have a route that has already been consulted on, and you know, like everything, obviously we've got a number of extensions to the network that we would want to enact. DLR extension to Thamesmead, West London Orbital, and the Bakerloo line extension is absolutely on that list. We obviously need funding for that, which is part of the discussions that Rachel and colleagues will be having with government going forward. But yes, we absolutely politically support the extension. Of course, the Northern Line extension was reached in part by contributions from developers as well. So in terms of where that funding comes from, I think similar ideas would be useful in regard to the Bakerloo line extension. One thing to say is that we're looking at ways of enhancing services along the Old Kent Road corridor from Lewisham to Elephant and Castle as well on the bus network as an interim, but obviously the Bakerloo line extension remains our ambition.
Thank you, and hopefully further good news in the future on that. Deputy Mayor, what would TfL be looking for from a multi-year government funding settlement?
The principal thing would be assurances on what the envelope is. As you will have heard, the benefits of having long-term settlements are many. Planning in most areas requires more than a few months, but it's particularly the case with regards to transport, where the delivery of rolling stock, the planned pipeline of works is something that is decided many years in advance, and it's helpful obviously not just to the passenger to have a level of certainty and security about what it is and isn't that TfL can do, but also of course to our supply chain, because we support a number of jobs around the country. In London Underground, certainly for every £1 that's spent, 55 pence of that goes outside London. We've heard about the new Piccadilly line trains that are being built in Goole. We've just talked about the Bakerloo line extension, but as part of the Bakerloo line extension, a necessary but not sufficient condition of that would be the Bakerloo line upgrade, and that of course requires new rolling stock as well. And as Andy has said, that's an ambition of TfL to get the new generation of trains on the Bakerloo line, which of course are the oldest serving trains, I think, in Western Europe, certainly in the country. And so these projects become more and more urgent as time goes on. So that level of security, I think, is the number one benefit of having a multi-year settlement, which of course is the case in other transport authorities around the country.
Thank you. Thank you. And my final question: what would be the impact of a potential single integrated funding settlement for government for the GLA, and what would TfL capital funding be in scope for an integrated settlement?
Gosh.
Sorry, that was two questions.
I think I'm afraid my knowledge of wider GLA funding processes is very limited, but and I might have misunderstood your question, but in terms of an integrated settlement on devolution and greater control of where funding comes from, I think. And again, apologies if I'm not answering your question, do tell me if that's the case. But the white paper yesterday, I think, was very positive in terms of the government's thinking on how regional and local authorities will be able to exercise further powers. I think it was also very clear in making a case for London being for raising other regions to the same level of powers that London has, but also recognising that London has benefited from having years of devolved government, particularly on transport, and that an additional set of powers for London would be considered as well. So I'm optimistic that the thinking in this regard has certainly moved very positively in our favour, and I think that the greater powers we have to be able to control the budget would obviously be in London's best interest.
Yep, that's a very helpful answer. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Yeah, I've just got a very brief one about toilets and long-term funding settlements. It's not in the TfL submission, but it is in the Mayor's consultation draft. But I can't see any actual pounds attached, apart from obviously the 3 million a year for 5 years that we already know about. I'm just wondering, when you get to a new business plan and possibly with a multi-year funding deal, what more would that certainty help you do on toilets and step-free access?
I think we're starting to make some real progress on toilets now, thanks to the funding that the Mayor's provided to us. And thank you, Assembly Member Russell, for your holding us to account on this. And I think we are making progress now. I think the key thing is the one big change is we're now factoring these into design for any new schemes. I'm not sure they have necessarily been prioritised previously. Our real focus, as you know, at the moment is around reactivating facilities that have either been fallen into disrepair or been closed for other reasons, notably antisocial behaviour, and of course delivering a number of new facilities across the network. At the moment, I think I'm right in saying we haven't provisioned any additional funding as yet. We will keep that under review. It is a key part of our Equity in Motion plan to make sure toilets are a key element of our customer provision going forward, and we'll keep that under review. Once we get the capital settlement finalised, then we'll see if there's any additional funding that we can provide, either directly from TfL or as part of that settlement, as part of our longer term capital plan. But at the minute, it's just the 3 million per annum that the Mayor is providing.
Okay, thank you. I think it's brilliant that TfL is taking it as an accessibility issue, the provision of toilets, but there are some people for whom that 20 minutes journey time between toilets, which is the current, what you're aiming to achieve, is just too far. And so any more that can be found would be very much appreciated, particularly by people who experience extreme urgency.
Yeah, we recognise that, and obviously that's our initial starting position, because at the minute it's considerably more than 20 minutes. Over time, if we can look to improve that, we absolutely will.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any further indication, so that brings an end to our questions this morning. So could I thank our guests for attending today? Thank you very much. And your answers to our questions. So just to wrap up then, can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion and delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with the party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? A couple of quick items then. Can I ask the committee to note the Mayor's decision list for the period 27th of September to the 7th of November 2024 and decide whether to highlight any issues for detailed consideration? And can I ask the committee to note the committee's work programme and its dates? The next meeting of the committee will be held on the 7th of January 2025 at 10 a.m. here in the chamber in City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes this morning's meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.